come out to the coast. We'll get together, record a few podcasts.
That's good.
Thank you.
That's good.
Thank you.
You need a little Zippo.
I got a little lighter. Come on, I'm in a van.
Do you want to up though? You're so quiet.
At that moment, he's pretty quiet because he's talking to himself. I mean, look, here are the other options. Okay, I mean, imagine I'm reading a bloody sweatshirt, and this is another one of my infamously good impressions. Now I have a podcast. Ho ho ho.
Yeah, there's a lot of pretty famous lines in this movie, Griff.
Yeah, yippee-ki-yay, I was potty kai cast doesn't really feel like a thing. You just had an adverse reaction as if you tasted
like that at all.
Bad food.
It's like someone, did smelling salts under my nose.
Potty kai cast?
Ugh. Okay. Yeah, no, good job. It's my favorite line in the movie.
Which
the one you did. Come down to the coast, we'll have a few laughs.
This is one of those movies. I mean, I think about this film so much as just like the textbook sort of case study in how do you make someone a movie star, right?
Sure.
How do you take someone who's an actor or even a TV star and make them undeniably a movie star? And there are like 15 moments in this movie, that being one of them, where you're like, this guy his stock just shot up 10% with that one line reading.
Sure. He's got the secret sauce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they know how to frame him, how to use him and all of that.
Our guest should start talking right away.
Yes.
To be clear.
He needs no introduction. He's leaning all the way in.
I'm waiting for my moment. I didn't want to interrupt because you guys were in a flow, but I have a suggestion for the title after hearing those attempts. Try hard.
Well,
that is Griffin Newman.
Basically, my energy overall all the time.
Good God, you tried.
I tried hard. I tried hard.
A vengeance.
I did. I came in spitefully.
I never saw this movie without him being a movie star to me. That's the thing. I didn't have that experience of like, oh shit, which maybe our guest did. Maybe
I have to assume you watched the transformation happen in real time.
Let me tell you, kids. Yeah. I am 53 years old.
Congratulations.
So I have watched the entire arc of Bruce Willis's career. So first time I notice him is, of course, like most people, in Miami Vice, where he plays like a bad guy.
Yeah.
Sure. I also notice him in an episode of the new Twilight Zone called Shatterday.
Okay, so you were like pinning this guy early. He was, popping for you.
I'm telling you, you can jump on YouTube and watch, just enter Shatterday. His performance is fantastic. That run of Twilight Zone, which was done in the 80s, long after Rod Serling had passed, was like maybe 2 seasons, a really strong run of episodes. Yeah. And he popped from that as well. And then I guess on the heels of that, he got David Addison. Now, I watched Moonlighting with my mom every week. I think it was like 9 o'clock on Wednesdays or Tuesdays or something like that. And fell in love with this guy. My first impression of Bruce Willis as David Addison on Moonlighting was, he's a TV version of Bill Murray. And Bill Murray came from TV, but he had graduated to become, Peter Venkman or
he was exclusively a movie star at that point. Yes. Yeah.
So he was the leading man who, in terms of that character, be it the Bill Murray archetype or David Addison, the original man-child, who would not grow up. Those characters infected my work. Those characters from the 80s infected my work from the 90s. So Randall, Brody, Banky, they're all the children of Winger from Stripes, played by Bill Murray, and David Addison from Moonlighting. Like, I loved the character and I loved the performance so much. And Bruce was from Penns Grove, New Jersey. He's from many places because he's military brat. I think he was born in Germany.
But kind of a Jersey Hall of Fame guy, quietly. I don't feel like he is talked as much
as a Jersey guy
in the Jersey framework, but I think that is key.
I trade on Jersey as a currency. I have my entire career.
Yes.
He does not. I had to dig that. I mean, I knew that myself. And when I met him for the first time on the Live Free or Die Hard, on the Die Hard sequel, that was one of the things we talked about. I was like, the pride of Penns Grove. And he was real taken aback. He's like, that's right. I am a Jersey boy. But he wasn't born there, right? I think he was born in Germany.
On a military base in Germany, right? Because his his mother was German and his dad was a soldier. And then They moved to Jersey when he was like a little kid. When
right.
He was like
and
2.
then he was there until he moves to Hollywood, basically, right? Or
that's right.
Well,
around New York
then he
for a
goes.
bit?
No, he goes to New York. He goes to Philly and New York.
Okay.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yep. He bartends.
He was
for
a bartender
quite
at
some time.
Kamikaze.
He knew Linda Fiorentino. Like when I worked with Linda Fiorentino on Dogma, she's just like, oh my God, me and Bruce used to bartend together. That was before I'd ever met him. I'd meet him years later.
I mean, that's pretty cool. Like imagine the two of them.
The energy wafting off that
that's cool to imagine.
But also think about it. What are the chances that two people behind a bar both go on to movie
stardom, like genuine movie stardom,
right?
Obviously, Linda's was shorter, but like still, like in blockbusters that people love forever.
Yes,
get a job at that bar is what I'm saying.
It's also one of those things. It's like that's like the joke. You go to the bar and it's like, well, I'm not really a bartender. I'm an actor, right? But I feel like I've heard accounts from people who went to that bar where it's like you walked in there and you knew this guy was going to be a star, even when he was struggling to get work or he was getting work but it wouldn't stick or whatever. He was kind of like a legendary, this guy's just got charisma bouncing off of him, dude.
Riz, as the kids used to say 10 minutes ago.
Arguably rizzed up from birth.
He was rizzed up. He was a Riz guy.
Rizzed up and out of control.
And that's what we're here
you
got
to remember, kids, like a lot of people, of course, Bruce Willis, Die Hard, and yes, naturally, the movie career. But Bruce was so huge that one career couldn't contain him, and he became a music sensation.
Yes.
He recorded 2 albums under the name of Bruno. And those albums, well, the first one particularly, dropped right around the time that I was learning to drive. My friend Ernie O'Donnell, who runs the Smodcastle Cinemas, our movie theater, he was the first one of us to drive, this big old Scout and stuff. And so he had put in a custom cassette player. The whole vehicle is this big old piece of shit, but the cassette player was cherry and brand new. However, it busted with a Bruce Willis tape in it. So that was the only tape we listened to for a long time.
It was Bruno constantly.
Bruno constantly. But we didn't care because we absolutely adored Bruno.
That's the thing.
I think, I don't know if Ernie went to the second album, but I bought the second album as well. What Don't Kill You Makes You Stronger.
Was that the Return of Bruno or was Return of Bruno is the first album?
Yeah.
The Return of Bruno is the debut album that has Jackpot on it. And what was the
Respect Yourself?
Respect Yourself was the big single. And it was huge. It wasn't like, oh, let's indulge this guy as an actor and he likes to sing now. That song was huge, played on MTV constantly and whatnot. It was a big radio hit as well. So there was a moment where that dude had TV, movies,
wine coolers,
and music.
Yeah.
Seagram's. Golden wine coolers, Seagram's, golden wine coolers. Go look it up on YouTube.
I've got it. I've got it right here. Yep, there they are.
Note for note
on the porch.
But it is that fascinating thing, and I think I don't know. It's like Dave and I were too young to experience this in real time, right? But as culturally obsessed dudes, we're growing up, watching Die Hard at our own coming of age and then digging in and being like, what was the context for Bruce Willis in this moment? We understand all of this from a distance, but you're sort of the version of this happening today is so different because there are 8 billion outlets. There are social media. There's so many different kind of branded partnerships where you're just no, there were strict gatekeepers in each of these positions and a limited amount of slots.
Yeah.
And Willis had been trying to break through for a while. And then when it hits, suddenly people are like, we'll take you in any form we can get. We want as much Bruce Willis in the culture as possible.
We became inundated, man. It was just all Willis all the time, but nobody complained. People were well into it.
It was good times.
And he was very earthy. You know what I'm saying?
This is the whole thing.
Was not to the manner born. He the bartender part of his mythos was laid in there thick, and so he was very man of the people, which also helped his ascendancy. But I think the key factor, and it's something he should be shouted out for, because in this era it was very difficult and very few made the leap. He started in the medium of television, which puts your face into everybody's home. This was in an era where it was not uncommon for 20 to 30 million people to watch a show or something.
And why go to the movies and pay when you can get Bruce Willis at home for free was sort of the line of thinking that would trap people on television.
There were TV actors and there were movie actors, and very seldomly did one successfully leap to the other. But Robin Williams and Bruce Willis were two of the first in the 80s that made that jump so successfully that most people don't remember they came from television.
Yeah.
But like when we were making Good Will Hunting, name drop, Robin Williams said, like as we were going into the bar in Toronto, shoot the people across the street going, Mork. And you're like, this is like 15 years after Mork. And I was like, Mork, man, that's you can't hear that anymore. He goes, I hear that all the time. And I was like, really? But it was so long ago. I would imagine it'd be like, good morning, Vietnam. And he goes, TV makes you family.
Right.
Yeah.
And I am family to like a lot of these people. And it was a very revelatory thought because I've never been a TV star. I've never been a movie star, but I've got peripheral experience with each. But this was like somebody who like Mork for Mork blew the fuck up. And then that dude was able to successfully parlay that into a movie career thanks to George Roy Hill and The World According to Garp.
Yeah.
Bruce Willis, like for this era, it should have gone no better than like moonlighting for him and a series of TV movies and stuff like that.
Well,
but
I mean,
he boom, skyrocketed out. And we know why, right?
Yeah, it's this film is just the perfect vehicle.
Why this film?
Well, I want to introduce the show. But because I think you teed this up perfectly, I want to throw out this one anecdote. I was rewatching the movie this morning with commentary. McTiernan talked about how many times he turned this movie down. And this is one of those great, like, kind of miracle movies where everything could have gone wrong and so nearly went wrong and all the pieces come together perfectly at the last second. McTiernan turned it down a bunch of times. Every other actor turned it down. Bruce is the last guy on the list. But the time McTiernan finally says yes to the script, he'd turn it down, they'd rewrite it, they'd send it back to him, he'd go no. They'd turn it down, rewrite, send it back to him, no. And he's like, the draft I finally said yes to was because on page 4, they had written in the detail that when Argyle picks him up at the airport, he says, it's my first day driving a limo. And he goes, no worries, it's my first time riding in one. And then cut to he's sitting shotgun up front with the limo. And he went, this is the guy I want to build a movie around. This tells you everything you need to know about this type of guy. And the audience is going to like him immediately if he refuses to sit in the back of the limo.
You gave me fucking chills, dude. Yeah. Like, because I'm just remembering that moment and going like, you're right. Like the connectivity, and think about it. When I see this movie, I'm 17 years old. Coincidentally, plug, I see it in the movie theater I now own.
Oh, wow.
It was the Atlantic Cinema in Atlantic Highlands back in the day. Now it's Montcastle Cinema. So when I was just there doing shows this weekend, I was in the same theater where I sat in the back of the theater, and one of the marketing campaigns is it will blow you out the back of the theater.
Yeah.
And we were in the back and it did blow us away. But I going to see it in real time when it actually opened, this was like a guy who I loved on TV, but the whole world didn't necessarily think of him as a movie star.
This is a flyer. Making him this guy is definitely not some guarantee.
Huge risk.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And it was like for them, I think if I remember the story correctly, they got him Moonlighting had just happened the first season or something like that, maybe the second season, but he had a small window to shoot. He was the one that was available, and his agents were able to get him real money.
$5 million.
I mean,
we'll
get into all of it.
Yeah. No, but that was a big deal.
Deep conversation.
I'll follow your lead.
Sure.
Sorry.
Look, this is after all a podcast about filmography.
Thank you, Griffin.
It's called Blank Check with Griffin and David.
There you go. I'm David.
I'm Griffin. I flipped it up in that case. I gave you the space to say it first.
It's fine.
It's a podcast about directors who have massive success early on in their career, say making Die Hard as their third movie ever.
Die Hard.
An early Die Hard.
Yeah.
And are given a series of blank checks, make whatever crazy passion projects they want. Sometimes those checks clear, and sometimes they tie a fire hose around their chest and swing outside of a building as it's exploding baby. It's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah. This is Die Hard. We're talking John McTiernan. What's the miniseries called?
It's called Pod Hard with a Venge Cast.
Right.
Our guest today returning to the show, writer, director, filmmaker, raconteur, podcaster, movie theater owner, and co-star of Live Free or Die Hard, Kevin Smith.
That's true.
I texted you
Kids,
some.
I'm I'm here because I've worked with Bruce Willis and Alan Rickman.
This is true.
Yeah.
I texted you some months ago, and we were just texting back and forth. And I said, by the way, got to get you on Blank Check again. We're doing McTiernan. And similar to last time where I said doing Raimi, I didn't even suggest anything to you. I just said, here's the platter. I'm curious to see what you take to. And you said, I was in a Die Hard movie, and I did direct both Bruce Willis and Alan Rickman. And I went, look, I'm very aware of all this. I didn't know if that made you too close to want to talk about it, but I certainly would love to hear you get into this. And I've heard you so many times over the years talk about how totemic this film was for you and those two guys and their careers. And you have so many different perspectives around this film.
I talking about, I mean, granted, I do have I aggregated from fan to professional who got to work with the two stars of the movie. But first and foremost, before I was a filmmaker, I was just a movie guy. I just loved movies. And so this was one of the movies I loved, and like everybody. And I just loved it enough that later on in life, when people were like, who do you want to put in a thing? I was like, what about that? What about that?
Yeah.
What about them? So I feel like this, if anyone's like, oh, he's gonna roast Will, no, this isn't what that's about at all. Like, I'm here to testify as both fan and filmmaker, who later worked with the two giants that made this movie. But honestly, if I could have worked with anybody who worked on Die Hard, it might have been McTiernan. Like, he is the unsung star of this movie. Yes. Everyone talks about Bruce. Everyone talks about Alan Rickman. This was the movie where most folks, unless you were from the UK, discovered Alan Rickman.
100%.
Oh, yeah. This is his first movie role, period. That's what's insane, is he had done a tremendous amount of theater, both in the UK and on Broadway. He had done a little bit of TV, but mostly British TV. Yep. And this is his first movie, period. Talk about another film that perfectly sets someone up for the rest of their career. Makes them iconic immediately.
Well, I mean, acting comes down to choices, right? It's a job of choices. As an actor, as you know, is like, I'm going to choose to say it like this. And you hope it lands in a way that connects with the audience, makes them forget that all this is bullshit. And for a moment, they buy truth and reality in it. So the job literally comes down to choice. This guy made some of the most interesting fucking choices you can while making pretend, particularly with across his entire career.
Yes.
But definitely with Hans Gruber. Like, we had seen big bads and Euro trash villains in movies before for years. This dude took a completely different approach where, like, there were moments where you're like, I kind of like him better than the real guy, the hero. Yeah, he's charming as fuck. He's got the riz.
You kind of rizzed up. He's also rizzed up. They should have called him Alan Rickman.
You kind of, if he didn't shoot, not to dive right into it, and we can pull back, but like, if he didn't shoot Joe Takagi, you would 100% be rooting for them to get away with it. Yeah. Like, yes, you don't want anyone to die, and you want John to get him.
Everyone can win.
But you'd be kind of like, I kind of want them to open the vault and get the money.
Is there an Inside Man ending?
Fuck this company, whatever. Who cares?
Especially in this day and age, don't you think if they tried to do Die Hard now, the audience would be like,
yeah,
money.
Get him. Yes. But because he shoots Joe and you like Joe, he's like two scenes with that guy, but you're kind of like, this seems like a good guy. And he shoots him so callously, that's enough for you to be like, well,
but it's another smart story calculation of, like, McTiernan knows that's the one thing that's going to make you.
Oh, no, 100%. And I want to ask you about McTiernan. Yeah, Kevin, did you ever interact with him over the years? Like,
never. It's
kind of on the downswing when you're on the upswing, I guess. Yeah.
There is a DGA, the Directors Guild. And you would imagine, like, oh, you guys all hang out and sit around and fucking smoke cigars?
I imagine it being like the SNL Five Timers Club, where every great director is there with a smoking jacket.
Right. They dragged me into the DJ years ago. I didn't join the DJ for years in the beginning of my career because for some reason, I felt like, hey, man, I'm an indie outsider. And also, like, Robert would jump in and out. Like, whenever they would let him do a thing, he was like, well, I'm quitting.
And Tarantino, too. All the Miramax guys were kind of DGA resistant.
It just didn't, there was no, to me, like, I met with the head of the DGA East and West because they were like trying to get me to join. This is like 2000, I want to say 4 or something like that. And they were like, you're deep into your career. Look at all the movies you've made. Like, it's kind of weird that you're not in the DGA. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. I made it this far without. I came from indie film. Like, I kind of doing my own thing. Then they were like, this is the money that you left on the table that you would have made if you'd been part of the DGA from your second film forward. Yeah. And it was a substantial, it was 7 figures. And, I was like, wait, what? Where'd that money go? And they're like, not to you.
Yeah. So you like health insurance, Kevin?
Yeah. Honestly, only this year did somebody explain to me that I have a pension because of the DGA.
Yeah.
Because I was talking about, we were getting ready to make, this summer at that movie theater at Smog Castle Cinemas, we made a movie called the 4:30 Movie. We got a waiver during the strike to shoot. So while we were shooting this flick, I was talking to Liz Destro, who's my producer, along with Jordan Monsanto. The 2 of them produced like the last 4 movies and stuff. And I was like, well, if we have any troubles, I'll just, jump out of the DJ. And she goes, you can't do things like that. Like, you're too close to a pension. And I was like, what pension? And she's like, well, what do you think that money that you pay in the DJ was for? And I was like, I don't be a member of a secret society. And she's like, no.
Get the ring, the decoder
pension.
ring.
Yeah. I was like, I don't know. The aforementioned smoking jacket. But she was like, no, Kevin, like, you being in the Writers Guild, you get a pension. You being in SAG, you get a pension. You being in the DGA, you get a pension, because we don't work in a traditional world like most people that work for a company get a pension when they retire. So they set these things up. This is what your guilds are for, to look out for you in your old age. And none of that had ever processed prior. Again, I came up through indie film. So like that just felt very like corporate structure to me. But now that I'm a 53-year-old man, I'm like, do you mean I'm going to get free money in 10 years? Like, this sounds amazing. And they're like, it's not free money. It's money you've been paying into this thing.
Right. This is the bargain we
structured
make.
piggy bank. Yeah.
Yes. But back to the point, never met John McTiernan.
Yeah.
At all these DJ meetings that we never went to. And I wish I would have. I mean, we all know he got into trouble at one point.
Yes.
Right? Later on.
Yeah, a little trouble.
Had nothing to do with Die Hard, but almost sounded Die Hard.
It was a little Die Hard. It was Gruberian.
Yes. there was a hands-on approach, so to speak. But I never met him.
Yeah.
But he is the unsung star of this movie. I don't think in many other hands this movie is the same as and it's, believe me, I'm not taking anything away from the screenwriters. But it was Stephen D'Souza. How many people wrote this?
Yes,
two people are credited. Jeb Stewart Jeb Stewart and Stephen D'Souza are the big writers. Yeah.
Right. And being the 80s probably went through a lot of writers' hands that they're not even credited and stuff. But it feels to me, as somebody who's been doing the job for 30 years, and I know, I'll set aside this disclaimer. Last time I was on Blank Check, man, like, I got to meet the audience afterwards and my socials and stuff. And they were very generous and lovely, but the compliments were like, I always thought this guy was a fucking idiot, but he was actually, it was that kind of thing, So, any boost, any plug is a boost. So I was never like, well, I wish the compliments were better than that. I'm happy to make a convert.
Sure.
So that all being said, just to kind of lay out there for the potential Cine East audience, meeting McTiernan, for me, would have been an education, because this is a guy who I feel, I've been doing the job for 30 years, but you may not like the movies I've done. In my yeoman-like opinion, I feel like he shaped the movie. I feel the presence of the author, of the director as author, in a way that you feel on, like, Zucker Brothers movies in the back, Shyamalan movies. It was that specific touch, McTiernan, as they called them, that made Die Hard what it was. That element that you pointed to early on, where he read in the script, he was like, he's going to sit up front. I know how to do this.
That's the story.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
I mean, when you think about Predator, where he had a lot of influence and he's a crucial part, but like, that's a Schwarzenegger movie, right?
It's a Schwarzenegger movie, and he's fighting in real time to get the respect to be able to do
jungle,
things his
and he's
ways.
dealing with special effects nonsense.
Right.
This one, it's like, this is not a Bruce Willis movie or an Alan Rickman. Those guys are not
you have
power,
two untested
they're not
guys.
clouty enough.
Yeah.
And like, it is a Joel Silver movie,
right?
Or whatever, like that.
Yeah.
That is a big personality, but still, like, he has a lot of muscle now. Like, he can,
Not only that, like, Joel Silver, arguably the biggest name at this point attached to the movie, but also Joel Silver is going like, I just was in the jungle with this guy.
He's
on Predator.
a little bit right.
I saw how this worked out. I want to be in the McTiernan business. That's a smart bet. And a thing that we found interesting about covering McTiernan is so often now I'm saying to people, we're doing McTiernan next, and they're going, who's McTiernan? Or like, what else did he do besides Die Hard? There is this weird degree of him being a little bit anonymous. And I often find as well that people will assign his movies to other directors.
Sure.
They'll be like, I thought Tony Scott directed that.
Right. The other big age.
I mean, he had like a Penny Marshall 1, 2,
yes,
3 hits in a row that define the culture. And like, it's not too far from Die Hard that we get to Hunt for Red October, right?
It is. His first movie is Nomads, and then it is Predator, Die Hard, Hunt for Red October in a row.
Yeah. And they're like, the
3 movies that people still, I mean, other than, of course, the Cinema Podcast, 3 movies that are still talked about by kitchen sinkers, people that don't live and breathe entertainment. Like, oh, it's on TNT, I'll watch that, or I'll spin that on Netflix.
In 4 years, he makes those movies.
In 4 years,
to
he
90.
makes them right away.
Yeah.
And in his attitude, when he talks about these things, and it's been fascinating because it's not like there is this degree to which he's publicly a little bit anonymous, but he still does tons of interviews. He records like new commentary tracks and whatever. I've been trying to read as much and watch as much and listen to as much in prepping these episodes, and he speaks very transparently about everything. But he's also got that like old school studio director sort of like John Hawkes. They pass me a script. If I think it's okay, I shoot it, you know? And his decisions are very intelligent and thoughtful and big picture, and he understands every capacity of what each element of the medium can do and how to use it for his own storytelling and all of that. But he's also very unpretentious about all of this, which I think his lack of self-mythologizing his own authorship perhaps like feeds into it. But yeah, this movie is it is really, yes, quietly his star vehicle as much as it is a Willis and a Rickman star vehicle.
Who would be his modern day equivalent? Like, you can't go like, Chris Nolan, because Chris Nolan like generates a lot of his own material.
It's Christopher McQuarrie, but in a weird way.
Yeah, like McQuarrie.
But Chris McQuarrie's also a writer.
Jean called it Sarah a little bit, but he never quite got to like the,
No, when I hear like Christopher McQuarrie doing these hours-long Empire Magazine podcast interviews after each Mission Impossible movie comes out, when you hear him break down his process, it feels very similar to the way McTiernan talks about his understanding of how an audience is going to track things in real time, which is the main thing both of these guys are concerned with. Nothing they do is for flash or showy for the sake of trying to call attention to their own style, show off their skill as a filmmaker. It is like, what do I need this audience to understand or feel in this moment, and what is the most elegant, effective, and entertaining way to do that?
And let me also take you back to that era when marketing a director was not a priority. You knew some directors' names, of course, like George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, Clint Eastwood went from actor to director.
Exceptions to
Kevin Costner when he did, when he also did the transition. Generally speaking, no studio was like, let's put the filmmaker out there to talk about it. So they never really sold the filmmaker. That was something that feels like it started in the late 80s, early 90s. Really came from indie film culture where you don't have stars in a movie. So who is going to go out and promote your movie? Who best to speak about it than the filmmaker who had enough passion to get it made in the first place? Yeah. And so during the 90s, you start to see the ascendancy of the director as a personality. And that's the era that I came up in. Yeah. So he doesn't. He comes in up in late 80s when a studio director is like, well, who directed? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
There is
a star.
Nothing on this poster that's like from the director of Predator or anything like that.
Right.
They could put that
that's
on
what's
there.
Wild, that it's not even, I wouldn't imagine they'd put his name on there, but from the director of Predator feels like a pretty good marketing tactic.
Yes and no, though. But Predator is a very distinct sci-fi film.
They might be worried.
I think with this, they're like, we don't want anyone thinking there's lizards and shit in this.
and Predator is, Predator was designed as a B picture.
Sure.
but a skillful B picture, as Arnold was in this transition point of his career. Die Hard is intending to be an A picture.
It's a summer blockbuster. It's Fox's summer blockbuster.
But this is a high-end stake of an action movie.
So part of the way it was marketed in the era as well, and they didn't go very far with this, but I distinctly remember the sell was probably most of the audience not overly familiar with the Irwin Allen disaster movies of the 70s.
Right.
But they had passed and gone out of vogue. But there was a piece of marketing at the beginning of Die Hard, that it will blow you out the back of the theater, that was about the power of the story itself. And there was a likening to disaster movies, which hadn't been in vogue in a while. But there's a bit of towering inferno to the idea of him like being up in Nakatomi Plaza and stuff. So you could see the kind of parallel was there, but they didn't deep dive with that very much because
they hit
if I remember correctly, by week 2, it exploded and became what it is.
Well, there was, incredible segue you don't even realize to the beginning, the origins of this movie. But there is the really telling thing where the first poster was, "It will blow you away," and it was the building. And Bruce's face wasn't on it, and his name wasn't on it, because they were a little worried, are people going to take an action movie seriously if it's got the wine cooler guy's face on it?
They were really heavy on, this building is like 40 stories tall, guys.
Yeah.
Like, there's going to be action all over it. Like, they were really hitting the building.
And then, like, week 1, week 2 into release, they were like, print up new posters,
get
Bruce's face next to the building. We're selling Bruce.
You could see like somebody, like almost like the marketing exec toy meeting in Big.
Yes.
Where he's like, "What's fun about a building?"
Right.
Like, so they were like, "Let's put a guy's face."
We need to care about the guy in the building. I think
when they put his face in the building, by that point, the movie had been out and people were like, "Bruce Willis is wonderful," and they were like, "Yeah, put him on the poster."
Right. They were selling the thing that people were already buying. They were adjusting the marketing to what was popular.
All right. Roderick Thorpe, detective turned novelist. He wrote a book called The Detective, got turned into a movie with Frank Sinatra in 1968.
Yeah.
In the 70s, Thorpe writes a sequel called Nothing Lasts Forever, right? That's the name of it?
Yes. Inspired by
the Towering Inferno. Basically sets, what if my guy is in a towering building?
Because the book is Glass Inferno. The movie comes out the same year the book is finally published. It's unclear which one he was inspired by. But
drafting off of
either way, it was like, maybe it's time for me to do a sequel to my book that sold well and was turned into a movie. Part of the emphasis is they already made a movie with a big movie star. If I write a sequel, they'll probably option it right away, which he was right about. And he was drafting off of this kind of exploding building disaster movie thing seems to be popular. What if I put my character in a setting like that?
That and terrorism is like, a hot plot in the 70s. Like, what if you had to deal with terrorists?
And his book is explicitly terrorism. His book is not robbers pretending to be terrorists.
Yeah.
His book is, you imagine the protagonist of this film being a Frank Sinatra type, much more of a kind of hard-boiled, angry, sad noir type cop in a straight up he's got to shoot down terrorist setting. I tried reading the book.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly serviceable airport thriller.
Sure.
I did not realize how much of what I like about this movie is not in the book at all.
Yeah,
outside of truly just one guy trying to fight the guys in the building.
And think about this, kids. That's what an innocent time it was in the 70s and the 80s, where people were like, you know what they'll pay to see in a movie theater? A big building.
Big building.
This building is so
Very
tall.
tall building.
You're never going to
So
believe
many
how big our
floors.
fucking building is.
I guess like the 60s and the 70s, there was an explosion of architecture. That
there's skyscrapers
probably
everywhere.
the invention of the skyscraper. So they're like, let's use that. That's a cheap effect.
That's the thing.
People are gawking at them.
It's free art direction. You're like, suddenly these things have been built in our real world that look like movie sets. Why not build movies around them?
So, all right. So Fox gets the rights. They made The Detective. Supposedly, Sinatra was at least given the courtesy phone call of like, hey, do you want to do this movie?
Yeah.
He says, I am old and I do not want to do this movie.
Well, there are two stages of, there's like...
There's a 70s call, and then there is the nominal contractual 1987 call of like, hey, 70-year-old Frank Sinatra, you want to do Die Hard? And he's like, no.
The first time I think he says, I'm too old and I'm too rich. But it speaks to like, This guy drafts on the trend of Towering Inferno, writes the quick cash-in sequel, sells it immediately. They go to Sinatra. Sinatra's like, no, thank you. Movie's just dead. And now you're just like, there's this right. They own this thing. It's just a pile. It's in the pile on the desk. It's low priority.
Lawrence Gordon, producer of this film, along with
Predator, was the executive on Predator. Right. Sorry, yeah.
Josh, he works at Fox. He revives this project in '87. He brings in Jeb Stewart, who is like a guy who had a development deal. Do you know Jeb Stewart at all? I don't really know what Jeb Stewart ended up amounting. Like what else he did. He did that movie Leviathan.
I believe he put an exclamation mark after his name. He was like, Jeb,
Jeb, Jeb. Oh, well, he wrote The Fugitive. Okay.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, sure. With David Towie. He wrote some, he wrote a lot of action movies.
That's pretty wonderful. It feels like, or it looks like, and having been in the business for a while, I guess I know it is like, if you do something well and it makes money, they're like, hey, that's the person. And that person they go to until the thing doesn't do well or until there's a new flavor of the month. And then they go to that person over and over again. David Koepp seems to have had a really good run of that.
Really good.
David Koepp seems to be like the go-to guy.
I think he's reliable, right? Whatever.
But you basically have this thing they own the rights to sitting on a desk for like a decade.
Right.
And then Lawrence Gordon is going like, we have open slots in our schedule.
Yeah. Here's the book.
Right. It's truly a thing of like, we need to plug in this type of movie in this season, this type of movie in this season. What do we have? It's often, now things are so like big IP based.
Yeah.
But these studios just look and they're like, what have we already spent some amount of money on? So we can make back the investment of whatever the original rights buy was.
So Stewart is struggling to write, to adapt this book.
Do a pretty straight adaptation.
He's got two kids.
Yeah.
He says one day he was like driving to the studio to write, working all night, coming back stressed out. He got in a huge fight with his wife. He gets in the car. He's driving from Pasadena back to Burbank. He almost crashes into what he calls a refrigerator box, like a giant cardboard box on the road, right? Mm-hmm. Pulls over to the side of the freeway. His heart is pounding, and he's like, that would have been it. Like, my wife would have never heard from me again.
We ended on a fight.
And he's like, that's what the movie's got to be. It's got to be someone my age who just got in a fight with his wife, basically. And then this shit happens before he gets to apologize to her.
I mean, it's an even better thing that he latches onto there. I mean, the aha moment is so incredible and is like the first spark of like something great in this idea, because none of that is in the book. But it's like, well, not just that's what the emotional setup of the movie is, but I can reverse engineer from this who the character should be, which is this is a guy who gets on a plane and flies to LA all that way just to apologize. And then in the moment, his ego gets in the way and he can't do it. And he fucks up with the one thing he was trying to do and then finds himself in the middle of an action movie. And the whole thing is like, how do I survive this to get to the other end of this and not have this be the greatest regret?
And now think about it. That's become a trope.
It's the most obvious trope in the world now, right? Yeah.
But at the time, it was novel. We were all like, they're having a fight. Like it starts as like this domestic drama.
Yeah.
In the midst of which a terrorist incident explodes that doesn't turn out to be a terrorist incident at all. It's a movie that keeps turning every few minutes where you're like, I know where this is going. Wait, I don't know where this is going. Now I know. No, wait, I don't know.
Well, and you talking about how this is a movie that's not only still studied by film dorks like ourselves, but also by like kitchen sink people. There's the third column, which is this is still a movie that executives try to replicate. And certainly for the 10 years after this, it was like the movie that everyone was trying to replicate. But people go like, how do you make a John McClane style hero, a Hans Gruber style villain? And how do you set the right emotional stakes in a movie like that? And the thing that Jeb Stewart talks about is that like he was like hotshot out of film school, shoots out to Hollywood, gets these development deals. And then it's like 3 years later, he's sort of just been stuck in the hamster wheel. And he keeps getting jobs that don't follow through. Nothing's getting made. Nothing's getting finished. He's somehow like successful and in debt. And now he's married and has kids. And he's feeling all this pressure. And it's like the frustration that leads to his fight with his wife on that night is in the midst of him trying to crack this script off a sort of like whatever paperback thriller that then like explodes into this emotional regret, which he then feeds back into the script. Like the pressure of him knowing he needs to make this movie work creates the stakes that gives him the stakes of the story in a way that I think is kind of beautiful.
The shooter is Jan de Bont, right?
Sure is.
Yeah.
How interesting that the best of the Die Hard, let's not call them knockoffs, but the children of Die Hard.
Yeah, Die Hard on a bus.
Speed was directed by the guy that shot Die Hard.
That's how obsessed the studios were with this movie that they were like, get us anyone who was on set and understands what the recipe was that made that movie work.
Okay, so look. Jeb Stewart turns into the script, gets a green light. Joel Silver comes aboard, sits him down and says, nothing personal, but you're going to get fired. You are fired. This has nothing to do with the script. I love the script, but I don't know you. I got to make a movie, and I got to make a movie fast, so this is how it's going to be.
Right, because it's an immediate fast track of, like, he hands in his draft with this emotional backbone, and they go, like, this movie has a release date 8 months from now.
My favorite.
You have a green light, you have no director, you have no star, it's going.
My favorite thing is that Joel Silver's like, your script's pretty good, by the way, but why doesn't the building blow up at the end? And Jeb Stewart's like, well, I don't know. I mean, like, if it blows up, didn't John McClane fail? Like, isn't that a problem? And Joel Silver's like, I don't give a fuck if he failed. No one cares. You don't spend money to come to the theater and not see a building blow up. And Jeb Stewart's like, he is right. Like, that is what he brought to the table. He was like, no, the movie's got to have explosions in it.
Yeah.
Like, was actually a good note.
So Jeb Stewart is still working on rewrites with Silver. They're trying to get a director attached. I mean, this is like, moving train because they have this summer slot where they want something like this. The first guy they offer the movie to is Verhoeven.
Yeah.
Sort of hot off
sense.
of RoboCop.
You're coming off of RoboCop. Yeah, that makes sense.
And Jan de Bont had shot so much of his Dutch work that it's like, that's kind of the mood they want to bring to this.
And McTiernan says he wasn't the first choice. We know Verhoeven was the first choice. I don't know if they offered it to everyone else.
Yeah.
But obviously Silver likes McTiernan.
And Fox does, and Gordon does. He's proven himself
but
to all these guys.
McTiernan keeps reading the script and sends it back saying, this is not fun. I don't want to see a cop shoot terrorists. I don't want to spend a year of my life immersed in a story like that. Like, I think McTiernan's thing, which is what transforms the movie, it's what you're talking about, Kevin, is he's just like, terrorists are not entertaining, robbers are entertaining. Can we make them robbers? Can we make this movie fun? Like, can we have humor here? And can we have, like, an ensemble of characters that are interesting rather than just like he just fucking wastes terrorists like on floor after floor.
The commentary, the word he kept on using was joy. Like in all these meetings, I was like, there has to be joy in this movie or else it's a bummer. And he very wisely pinned like terrorists bum people out.
Yeah.
Right? They just bad vibes. They make you think too much about like the larger political machinations of our bad world. And if the solution to them is a rogue hero going in and shooting them all, even if that's maybe like a net positive, it's not fun to watch. It's like haunted. And he like makes this whole spiel to Joel Silver, who's so antagonistic. And he's like, Silver, to his credit, was like, you're 100% correct on this. I'm not fighting you on this at all. Make them robbers. They come up with the hook of they're robbers trying to present their terrorists.
Right.
And then, he sees the sort of kernel of who McClane is in that limo exchange, but then goes like, we need to bring a guy in to do a pass and bring that to the forefront.
That's Steven D'Souza.
That's when D'Souza comes.
The humor.
Right.
So who brings D'Souza? Is it Joel Silver
it's
or
McTiernan? But the two of them, I guess. Yeah.
And D'Souza had written on Predator.
Yeah, and I mean, McTiernan just says that he is funny and has an ironic sense. Like, basically, that's who they want. D'Souza says he also just was being brought into, like, kind of, like, they walked through the building, through the sets, and figured out just how the geography of set pieces would work. Like, where can he fight who when, basically. Because the original draft didn't have
this on location specific stuff once they knew like where Nakatomi Plaza
was. Well, because Nakatomi Plaza is one of the Fox buildings, so they know they have this building at their like this free resource basically. But yeah, all of this is like evolving very organically and very quickly. We're writing to circumstances now. We're writing to our understanding of the layout of the building.
And we're writing to the taste of the director. Like, think about how old school this entire project came together. There was a book. The book was bought by a studio. sat for a while. Then it was assigned to a writer. Somebody read that script like, hey, we might have something here. Let's give it to another writer.
Yeah.
And then they put it in, or before that, in the hands of the director. The director had very specific ideas about why he didn't want to direct it, which then shaped the movie he would eventually agree to, and then further shaped by his tastes. Essentially, we're living in a culture of cinema culture that was deeply informed by John McTiernan going like, I think it should be this.
Yeah.
Like he made the movie, the action movie that he wanted to see, that he found interesting, that he found like, oh, let's put joy in it. Like there's something you don't see in these fucking movies. Let's put irony in it.
Did it feel that way when you saw, like, do you have a memory of that? Like of you being like, damn, this movie's like funny.
100%. 100%. I remember going into that theater and I convinced friends to come with me.
Right.
It was, it came out right around the summer. At that point, mostly everybody wanted to go to Snake Lake and drink and stuff. And I was like, no, man, this movie's supposed to be good.
Yeah.
Die Hard. And they're like, I don't want to go to the Sears movie. Everyone called it the Sears movie because the only reference to a term Die Hard prior to that movie was Sears had their battery, their car battery was called the Die Hard, which I believe is where they stole the title from. It was not a popular term, used throughout the culture. Die Hard was a Sears car battery. So the first time people started hearing there's a movie called Die Hard, they were like, what has Sears got to do with it? So I had to convince friends. Who was it? Shannon Fury came with me. Ernie O'Donnell came with me. Ernie O'Donnell, who now runs that movie theater, he came with me. And we sat in the back of the theater. And I was able to get Ernie to come with me because he also loved Bruno. We listened to the Return of Bruno album. That's where I learned to drive in Ernie's car. So we went in for Willis. Yeah. And Willis delivered. And he was, he wasn't David Addison.
Right.
He was definitely more hardened. He was quippy, but not nearly as quippy as David Addison. He wasn't a wise guy. Wasn't the class clown. But he delivered, and what he delivered in terms of like raw cinematic charisma, suddenly you were like, wow, he can be more than David Addison. This is even cooler. But there was like this moment of back and forth, like, who is that guy? The moment Hans Gruber starts fucking acting. Yeah. The moment Alan Rickman comes into the picture, who moves. Like Alan was a big fan of movement. Bruce was the one that at least said to me, it's a movie, we got to move. But Alan as a performer, like if you look at his entry into Die Hard, sweeping, low angle, and just commanding presence as he moves. He doesn't walk normally. He walks in this assured, brisk pace.
I mean, it's a thing that the Harry Potter movies get mileage out of 8 times in a row.
1,000%. The first time you see him enter a room in a Harry Potter movie, it's all about Alan's entrance.
They basically get a gag out of his entrance in each film.
Yes. And it was established probably here. Yeah. But he was the one that like all the gallows humor, the fact that he did kill Mr. Takagi, which then made him a threat enough to not want to root for. The irony, the like, come out to the coast, we'll have a few laughs. All of this made me as an audience member, and I know the people I went with, feel like that's the way it would be. Like that's how I would react.
Right.
Like you never felt that going to action movies prior to that. Right. You were looking at somebody like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone, and you don't put yourself in their shoes. Die Hard, quite like Batman, as opposed to Superman, Aquaman, Wonder Woman, you have a hero where you're like, I could see myself. Like, this is a victim of circumstance, this guy. And like, he's doing his best. And like, he's a monkey in the wrench, if you will. Like, he's identifiable in the way that most cinematic heroes weren't. They were too far removed. This guy, you could be this guy.
David?
Yes.
John McClane likes to die hard.
Okay.
Does he like to die hard, or is it hard for him to die?
It's actually a great
question. He's too good at living.
Yeah.
That's sort of his issue, right?
That's true.
His Achilles heel is he is too good at staying alive.
Okay.
Killing him is hard.
I feel like you should arrive at a point.
You know what is hard, though? Making several meals a day.
That's true. Yes, it's very hard.
Eat hard is what? Food hard is my life story.
It's hard
feed hard.
It's hard to feed yourself, and think of good things to cook and all this stuff. Factor.
Yeah.
our new friends, Factor,
have Factor.
delicious, ready-to-eat meals which make eating better every day easy, because these are pre-prepared, chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door.
Not all of us have a Daddy David at home making pasta 3 times a day.
So I do make a lot of pasta.
You do?
Look, no, because you'd have over 35 different options a week to choose from, including keto, calorie smart, vegan, veggie, and more. And there's lots of add-ons, Griff.
What?
Over 55 nutrition-packed add-ons that make your weekly meal planning even more delicious. So what are you waiting for, Griffin?
It gets started today. They have 2-minute meals?
They have 2-minute meals.
That's shorter than most of our ad reads.
All of them.
You fill up fast with Factor's restaurant quality meals. As you said, they're ready to heat and eat whenever you are. They got snacks, smoothies, and more.
I don't know what you're talking about, by the way. All our ads are 60 seconds long.
Jeez. Some of our listeners think they're 60 minutes long.
Yes, they got snacks. They got smoothies. They are less expensive than takeout. Every meal is dietitian approved to be nutritious and delicious.
And they're flexible for your schedule. You get as much or as little as you need by choosing 6 to 18 meals per week. Plus, you can pause or reschedule your deliveries anytime. No prep, no mess meals. Factor meals are 100% ready to heat and eat, so there's no prepping, cooking, or cleanup needed. I like the sound of that.
Yes, so head to factormeals.com/check50 and use code check50 to get 50% off. That's code check50 at factormeals.com/check50 to get 50% off.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Clint Eastwood was the first choice. Didn't get the humor.
Makes a ton of sense. I mean, you look at this being a corrective, what you're saying, this feeling very different at the time it comes out. This movie is sort of like functioning as a response to the rise of Schwarzenegger and Stallone getting huge and becoming more and more superhuman
hero. Yeah.
Right. And I think they're in design trying to roll it back to Dirty Harry, and they end up stripping it even further beyond that. But yeah, I mean, that was the thing. They said they offered this to fucking every guy in Hollywood.
Right. But Clint Eastwood, Paul Newman, and then Richard Gere are the most interesting ones that they could talk to at the most. And Gere, they're like, that's what we were thinking about. Like, a suave, sophisticated guy, like not a muscle-bound guy, like a guy who wears a jacket, right? And then like when they get Willis, that is, I do feel like, more like, okay, well, this is earthier. Like this guy's not.
Because I wouldn't buy that with Gere.
Suave,
Gere does have, he's American Gigolo. You know, it's different than David Addison, who does have a chip on his shoulder. You know, David Addison is this.
I think you would have gotten humor from Gere, not nearly as much. No. I think he would have been way more interested in being who he was at that point, which was Richard Gere. It would have been a Richard Gere vehicle.
He had a defined movie star persona, whereas Bruce had something to prove. And also Bruce is like emotion first. I mean, they finally Moonlighting has just gone up on Hulu recently.
Yeah.
After being out of circulation for an incredibly long time because of music rights. And now they finally sorted all of that out. It was like one of the later shows to get released on DVD once that was the craze. And then has been one of the last major shows to get on streaming. And I had never really watched it before. And it is insane just tuning in the first episode and being like, this guy is fully, like, he's arriving fully made, fully developed. Oh, yeah. I cannot take my eyes off of this fucking guy. But relative to what he becomes as a movie star, he has more vulnerability as David Addison than even the Bill Murray archetype, right? Where people call Bill Murray out in his bullshit, but he remains a little undeterred. There's that weird balance of these guys having the smartest dude in the room energy and running circles around people, and some of the other characters being like, is he just like a fucking flim-flam artist? David Addison shows the cracks at times, right? Yeah. And he shows his vulnerability, and he gets afraid, and he wants to win over Sybil Shepherd and everything. John McClane's a guy who's trying very hard to not show any of that. I mean, Ben and I saw this movie in theaters about a month ago, and not to reduce it to like dumb meme speak, but it finally cracked for me what this movie is about. And now I know the Jeb Stewart backstory of the almost car crash. But I was like, oh, Die Hard is men will literally do a Die Hard to avoid going to therapy. It is a movie about men avoiding conversations, right? And you can track that onto McClane, Powell, and Gruber. where Gruber is like creating this entire false narrative of who he wants everyone to think he is. This McTiernan thing of like, all of the terrorists should look like European male models. They should look like Armani models. They should be more like Richard Gere types, right? And McClane is a guy who like gets on a plane to have a conversation and then refuses to have the healthy version of that conversation. And Powell is like only able to process his trauma by talking to a stranger over a walkie-talkie.
Right. They both are, right. Yeah. Because they're not in the room together. They can confess like feelings to each other.
Right.
It's true.
And versus
is Powell in the book or a version of Powell in the book?
That's a great question. I think like
all these
that feels like a movie invention.
Yeah,
He feels definitely
he exists.
There is something of a trope to that character, but not this clearly establishes that trope. But like when I was watching the movie, it was not unfamiliar. I was not like, this is the first time I've ever seen something like this, where there's a guy up there and there's a guy in there and they're communicating.
Yeah.
Like, but they really played the poignancy of that, as we know, like particularly at the end where they give Powell his own moment to clear his deck after he gives his confessional mid-movie, where you're like, you know, these cops are not afraid to be vulnerable with one another. And so you get to see who they really are. And that your observation about Bruce in Moonlighting, his vulnerable David Addison is exactly on point. He is hysterical in that show, and he is the comedic second banana of that show. Right. But when they allow David Addison these moments, like, you know, there was an episode where his father's played by Paul Sorvino, and comes to town, and it's involving a storyline where his dad's about to marry a woman that David feels that he had a one-night stand with, you know, years and years ago. Really emotional storyline, but they were able to take that and just make him, I mean, for lack of a better term, but John McClane is way more macho, as we used to say in the 70s, than David Addison. But all of David Addison is there. It's maybe David Addison 10, 15 years later hardened to a large degree.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's the thing that made Bruce so fucking effective as a movie star is just like there is an innate kind of sad weariness to him. There is this like heavy-souled quality to him that cannot be completely covered up. And when he puts the charm and the riz and the humor on top of that, you get this sort of full meal, but there's always this feeling of like there's something kind of broken inside this guy. There's a longing, there's a thing he's struggling to express. I mean, yeah, Eastwood says, I don't get the humor, right? Paul Newman says, I don't want to shoot guns in movies anymore.
I'm sick of carrying a gun in a movie,
right.
Sure.
Then there's a list of guys that's debated over who the studio wanted, who casting wanted, who
the point
McTiernan
is
wanted.
No one wants to be in it.
Here's the one guy they sort of dance with a little bit, but it doesn't happen. And it gets to the point where it's like, this movie is a go picture. It is moving. It has been staffed up. They need somebody. Bruce Willis is in this very fascinating transitional stage where Moonlighting is still on the air. It's big. Everyone is having this feeling of this might be a guy who could make the jump from TV to movies. We rarely give people that shot. He has shot 2 films, both Blake Edwards movies. Only Blind Date has come out, which did okay. And I think everyone's take on that is like, that's a neutral. He didn't bomb. He didn't embarrass himself, but it's not like he proved himself as a movie star. Sunset is the next one, which is really expensive and is shaping up poorly. Yeah. But at this moment they cast him has not been released yet. So they're looking at it.
I don't know if you have a Blind Date take, Kevin. I don't know if you saw Blind Date back in the day.
Him and Kim Basinger.
Yeah.
I remember the song. There was a song about a guy's Billy Vera and the Beaters, right? What would you think? But
you
not
nailed
that
it.
song,
Let you get away. Oh, what a night. Anybody seen her? They had a lot of songs in this soundtrack.
I think it's anybody's seen her. It's like the red dress on. But I remember that movie. I saw it in theater. I was a huge Blake Edwards guy. Still am to this day. So SOB is one of my favorite fucking movies. So I did see it when it came out. Yeah. And I'm not saying like it was lesser Edwards, but like, you know, it wasn't SOB, but very few things are.
Remind me his agent's name. David, it's in the dossier.
His Bruce Willis's agent, Arnold Rifkin, basically says, look,
Arnold Rickman became his producer, and they made movies together for the next like 20 years.
He's like, no one wants to be in this fucking movie, so you're giving me $5 million for Willis, which is basically the highest salary for an actor like Bruce Willis. It's one of the highest reported salaries an actor had ever gotten at that point.
Right. And his thinking was basically like, the first movie is a freebie, right? If they're testing you out as a movie star, if it doesn't hit, people go, well, transitional, trying out. The second one can actually doom you. If you have two in a row that don't connect, you're fucked. They could feel that the second one wasn't going to connect. And he's like, we have them a little bit over a barrel because they can't get anyone for this.
Yeah.
Bruce has some marquee appeal, but he's untested as a movie star, and people don't know exactly where to slot him in as a movie star. The one thing we can do as an insurance policy is get him the quote-unquote record highest salary, even if it's a record that is
even
broken.
If it's for a second.
That's what he truly says. Like, they'll up. Someone else will beat the deal the next week. But for that one day, that way, if the movie bombs, they'll go, well, he did it for the money.
Right.
It wasn't like, warmed over returns. At least Bruce made like a healthy, tidy profit on it. You go back to TV, you do a second show, whatever the fuck it is.
It's kind of defensible where you're like, you wouldn't have done that? $5 million bucks? Come on.
Right.
Industry is furious because now they're like, fuck, what am I supposed to do? Give Tom Selleck $6 million for 3 Men and a Baby? Like, like have you set some benchmark? It's just like what happened with Jim Carrey getting 20.
Well, I was going to say, there's 10 years difference between the escalation is so wild.
Escalate.
From like 5 is seen as insane at that point, and 10 years later, it's 20.
Yeah.
It's multiplied 4 times. Schwarzenegger gets 15 for Last Action Hero.
Because they get Bruce.
Yeah.
They have to build out the supporting cast because of his fucking schedule.
It's another fucking blessing in disguise.
It is, yes.
Where much like Back to the Future, they're like, we got this guy half the time. At a certain point in production, Moonlight will have wrapped for the season, but at least for the first chunk, we're going to be sharing him. They have him in the mornings and the days. So we got to build the supporting cast out, which leads into McTiernan's insane read, which I had never heard before. That his take on this movie was, you got to structure this and build it like Midsummer's Night Dream.
Alan Rickman had done...
That's the reference?
Yes. Because he's like this classics guy. Like McTiernan studied drama at Juilliard.
Right. Yeah, he is a Juilliard guy. Yeah.
And he said, look, I'm not like hitting it beat for beat. I'm not trying to actually literally map on, Die Hard to Midsummer's Night Dream.
Right.
But he said it's this idea of this one night where everything goes crazy. And you establish this ensemble cast, and then this guy's going to turn into a donkey, and this person's going to fall under a spell, and this and that. And at the end, you reset things back to normal. And it's like, how do you set up as many colorful characters in this sort of contained setting and then test them all and let their personalities all explode?
Rickman had been on Broadway in Liaison Dangereuse as Valmont, and they liked him in that. They have him audition. Rickman apparently is like, I'm not doing this. What is this shit?
Yeah.
And his agents are like, you've been in LA for 2 days and you got offered this job. Like, you do not turn this down. You are doing this. And Rickman is like, obviously it changed my life. Like, it immediately changed his life. I mean, you worked with him. His rep is very menschy. I mean, obviously, he's not with us anymore. And I do feel like everyone misses him so much. But like, what was Rickman like?
He did not disappoint.
Yeah.
When I first saw him in in Die Hard and fell in love with him as an actor, I was, oh my Lord, I want to see everything this guy does after this.
Yeah.
And I absolutely did, but never once, because this was years before I even thought about being a filmmaker. Never once was like, one day I'm going to work with that guy.
Yeah.
Even when I started my career, I was not like, one day I want to work, get me to Alan Rickman. I don't make movies like that. But then we had, Dogma. And so I guess this is the story. And I just went over it recently with John Gordon, who was my exec at Miramax back in the day. And he went on to produce like David O. Russell's movies and stuff like that. And he ran Annapurna for a while. He ran like Universal for a minute. But John Gordon, he didn't remember this when I told him the story. And then he was like, oh my God, you're right. And I said, this shows you what a life you've led, that you don't remember this story. So he calls me up and he goes, dude, we just had a meeting with Alan Rickman. And I was like, Hans Gruber? And he's like, yeah, man. Like, we met with him about this Merchant Ivory project. I was like, how was he? Was he cool? They're like, he was very cool. He's going, but I have to tell you, all he wanted to talk about was chasing Amy. And I was like, what?
That's wild.
And he was like, yeah. He was like, we were pitching him this Merchant Ivory thing. And he said, it sounds interesting, but who made Chasing Amy? I would like to know what they're doing next. And they were like, oh, that's Kevin. He's making this movie Dogma. So John Gordon, when he called me and told me that, I was like, oh my God, the guy from fucking Die Hard knows who I am. I was excited alone for that. But John was like, what about him for Metatron? I was like, oh God, yes. I was like, yeah, fucking let's send him a script. So we sent him the script for Dogma, and he responded like immediately. A day after he got it. He was like, I'm not going to try to do the accent, but he was like, I absolutely adore this. Do you have a God yet? And I was like, somebody to play God. I had written that role for Holly Hunter, who was wordless in the piano. And that's why there's like piano jokes and references. But Holly Hunter had done A Life Less Ordinary with Danny Boyle, a movie about killer angels.
We covered that recently on the podcast, a very bizarre film and performance.
Very bizarre film. And because of that, she was like, I don't want to do another movie with angels and stuff. So Alan Rickman was like, do you have a God? And I was like, no, right now we're godless. And he was just like, well, I would like to ask my friend. I think she would find this hysterical. Emma Thompson. And I was like, yeah, go ahead.
You want to give her a call? Yeah.
So for about 2 months, Emma Thompson was God in Dogma. Alan gave her the script, and they were besties and shit. And he was like, you should come out and do this. I'm going to play the Metatron. You turn out to be God. That'd be great. And then I got this beautiful handwritten letter from Emma Thompson, like saying that, like, you know, I was really looking forward to this, but I'm actually not. I'm going to have to drop out. As much as I love Alan and the script, and she was like, I'm thinking about having a kid.
Sure.
So, you know, I want to concentrate on that at the moment. Thank you so much. Hope we work together in the future, blah, blah, blah. So I was like completely, you know, unsavvy in these days in terms of like the press, in terms of like, I'd say a thing and not think that like, oh, that's going to be newsworthy to somebody else. So hardly circumspect. I had a big fucking mouth. So I was doing an interview and I was like, oh, Emma Thompson was going to play God, but she wants to stay back in England and try to have a kid. So, and then we got a phone call from Emma Thompson's agent, who was very, very sweet, but communicated the message of like, can you please not tell people that I'm thinking about trying to have a kid? Because I opened my door this morning. The entire British press was sitting in front of it with cameras asking me about this question.
And it's not like a variety scoop of like Emma Thompson circling motherhood as a potential next project.
So he was, you want to talk about a mensch.
Yeah.
He not only did he join the movie, but he was like, oh, let me bring along legend Emma Thompson with me. So even though she dropped out, he loved the movie and was with us every step of the way. One of my favorite moments on the set of Dogma was we were between shots and we're at the church, and I looked over and Alan Rickman was sitting next to Jason Mewes, and they were deep in conversation. And I remember thinking, what the fuck could these two have to say to each other? Like, what common ground? But Rickman, like, absolutely loved Mewes. He's like, he was the one that used the phrase that I continue to use to this day. Alan said about Jason, he goes, he is a true American original. Yeah. And he was oddly fascinated by him and stuff. So he loved hanging out with him. He loved the shoot. We threw out Alan's back while we were making Dogma because we put these wings on him with a big harness and levers in another room. And we kept opening and closing them. And it literally threw his back out, like to the point where he couldn't move. So there's a scene in Dogma. We couldn't change our schedule where they all meet in this restaurant. He joins them and he slides into his seat in a very Alan Rickman sort of way. But it was only because he could not fucking move. His back was so bad. So he slides. He
was physically being slid.
No, he was sliding himself, but he was in physical agony in doing it because he couldn't move a quarter inch in any direction lest he be like, and periodically through the take, there were those moments you could just cut out and stuff. But his entry, he slides in the chair. He's like, going in style. And as soon as he finishes the line, somebody else starts talking. In the raw footage, Alan goes, because his back was so bad. You would imagine he would have been like, I fucking hate Kevin Smith and all his friends.
Right.
But he maintained a friendship with us for years. Me, Scott, Jason, my wife, Jen. Like whenever he would come to the States, he would find me. He would either phone me or he would send me an email and stuff. And whenever I went to England, the same thing. Like when I went to England, he would find me and be like, we're taking you out to dinner, him and Rima, his wife.
Yeah.
And then when he was in the States, he'd be like, you owe me dinner. And we'd take him out. So I remember one time I went to do a show at the O2 in London, like one evening with Kevin Smith type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, "Can I go?" And I was like, "Oh my God, you wanna?" He said, "Yeah, I love going to your shows. People know who I am in the audience."
Right.
And I was like, that's adorable. So they went to the show, I did the show, and then it's outside of London. So we all jumped in like the car service to go back together. I don't know if they'd taken the train or something to get there. So, but at that time, night trains don't really go back. We were more than happy to go back with him and Rima. So he told me this adorable story. He was talking about the show and how people come up to him and stuff and talk Die Hard, talk about Metatron, blah, blah, blah. Talk about, the sheriff of Nottingham, and cancel Christmas, shit
cancel
like that.
Christmas.
So we're driving back and I was like, "So how you doing?" He goes, "Well, I finally broke down and bought an apartment in New York." He'd been doing a lot of shows. He was directing the play, I Am Rachel Corrie. Mm-hmm. He had been in, what was it, Past Lives, Previous Lives, or something. I forget what it was.
He was in the Stompard thing. I forget.
So he was and spent a lot of time in New York. And so he was like, "I finally bought an apartment." I was like, "Oh my God, that's great, man." And he goes, "Well, not so great." I was like, "Why?" And he goes, "Well, I bought an apartment in the same building where my friend lives." And I was like, "Well, I would imagine that's really nice." And he goes, "Yes, but my friend is Ray Fiennes." And I was like, I didn't know that you guys were friends. He was going, "Yes. And we're trying desperately to keep all of this secret." And I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "Because if the Potter fans find out that Snape and Voldemort live in the same building, they will bring it down, So he was absolutely lovely. And it took me years to understand that we were actually friends. Because the first time I was exposed to this guy, I was like, he's an acting legend. And I always viewed him as this movie star, even when I got to work with him and found out he was a real human being and related to him and would hang out with him and stuff. And for years, I thought he was just being like British courteous, by being like, "Well, Kevin's in town, I'll reach out to him." But it wasn't that. He just genuinely liked me and Jay
has
and
delivered.
And
My
Scott.
God, he truly is the menchiest mensch I've ever heard of, basically.
Scott, still to this day, Scott talks about, he's like, "One time he just took me out to lunch." And he's like, and I was sitting there for 2 hours. In the middle of that lunch, I was like, I can't believe Hans Gruber is talking to me like I'm a real human being. Like, he was a guy. He could talk. He didn't just talk about movies. He never really talked about the business. He would talk about the craft if he wanted to and stuff. But he had such a great sense of humor, not a wicked sense of humor or something like that. He was just funny. And when you could make him laugh, you felt insanely powerful. There's some people in life where if you can crack them, you're like, "Oh man." And Alan's laugh was so rapturously joyous and silent. He was very like,
he is.
So you only heard the exhale.
He's such a fascinating figure to me because it's like he's 41 when they filmed this movie. Is that right?
It's got to be like a grown ass man.
He's a grown ass,
fully formed man. 46. He's 40. He's like 40.
Yeah, 41.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that thing where you're just like, it's not even. I rewatched The Gambler, the James Caan movie, recently, and like James Woods is in it for a scene as a bank teller, right? Yeah. And you're like, oh, it's weird to see baby, like primordial, unformed James Woods. But the moment when James Woods fully comes into his power and has established what his movie persona is, there's been footage of James Woods floating around, whether or not you've taken notice of this guy, versus like, this is Alan Rickman enters on screen a fully formed adult person. And not only that, like someone with complete command of his craft, even though he's working in a different medium. It has this meta effect that I think helps the movie, even if you're watching it today. Obviously, like, we're of an age where we watch it already familiar with Alan Rickman and other things. But there's something you have to imagine about, like, what you're saying. This guy just entering and being like, I got no read on this guy. This guy's inscrutable. I'm bringing no context from his previous performances, which is what this character demands is, who the fuck is this guy? Who walks like this? Who talks like this? What is his plan? What is his political agenda? But I feel like because this defines his thing so hard, and then for the next 30 years of his career, he's doing variations on this. He's doing, Sheriff of Nottingham is very much, can you play Hans Gruber in Old England? Or it's, can you play with the persona? Can you twist it? Can you this or that, Galaxy Quest, I feel like, is mocking what the public perception of him was.
Right.
And when he passed, there's so many stories that came out, like the ones you were telling from people who worked with him, who were like the dearest man, the most considerate, quiet, thoughtful. And it was like he kind of didn't have a public persona for so long, as much as his work was so big and he was so known and people loved him. It felt like, I feel like I, as a fan, was always worried, like, is he just kind of what he plays? Is he kind of haughty and aloof and sort of above it all? And then he plays it very well on screen, but I never hear people telling me that this dude's a mensch. And then when he died, not only was there such a constant outpouring, but then they published his diaries, which were so fucking good.
Yeah, no,
and
they're
are
incredible.
So like thoughtful and detailed. And he took these really detailed diaries while he was filming everything. And you're like looking into his process where I'm like, this is a guy who I just assumed he's 40. He shows up in his first movie. He's like, I know how to act. Just give me the script. I learn the lines. It's presets.
He doesn't know how to hold a gun. He doesn't know how to be in an action movie. Like he had to learn a lot, I think. But they are like, now that we have Willis, who's sort of more working class, he makes an urbane villain now makes sense.
Yeah.
Like rather than a muscle bound villain or whatever. Like, you know, this guy who's sort of like intellectual and he's talking about, you know, suits and he's talking about, you know, like he's got this kind of like, you know, classical music villain vibe.
Well,
right?
It's all the terrorism thing of like this guy, the last thing he wants anyone to know is that he is a common robber, right? He is embarrassed by the notion that he only is in it for gold. How embarrassing is that? He wants to put on this show of this is from coming from a political ideology. I have a statement to make. I have a point to make. But that helps that there's the sort of acting on top of acting in the character baked in.
He the persona, the Hans Gruber persona, which, as you mentioned, a lot of people were like, hey man, can you do that? Can you do a variation of that? Can you do a variation of that? We worked with him on DOGMA. We weren't like, give us Hans Gruber. It was like more like, just give us that voice. Like you're meant to be the voice of God and you have that voice. So go ahead. And so he's like, you know, he's got some British irascibility, but he's very gentle, very well spoken. And like, he's got this beautiful scene with Linda Fiorentino that's just touching as hell, where he has to explain to her that she's like the savior and stuff.
Yeah.
So naturally, of course, I wanted to work with him again and again and again. Only ever worked with him at one time.
Right.
He was meant to play the role of Will and Holly, which Will Ferrell eventually got.
Really?
Jane Silent Bob Strike Back. Yeah. But
that's Alan, a very different movie.
Crazy.
Yes.
And here's why, though. It's predicated on something that happened. There was another time that we were working together, and then it didn't pan out. So we made the Clerks cartoon. If you've never seen it.
Yes,
of course.
Yes. Leonardo.
There were only 6 episodes.
Yeah.
Leonardo is the villain of the show. And I made the show with Dave Mandel, who was from Seinfeld, Veep, White House Cleaners, it was not Road Trip, it was Euro Trip.
Yes.
You know, Scotty doesn't know. So Dave, a very funny guy. And so we created for Clerks like a Monty Burns sort called Leonardo. The town that everything takes place in was Leonardo. And the first episode is him opening Quicker Stop, like across the street in this giant, like fucking mega mall. So the character looks exactly like Hans Gruber. It's drawn to look exactly like Hans Gruber because Alan was like, we were like, Alan, will you play our bad guy? And he was like, I would love to do animation. So I'm not going to do voice. Sorry. So he signed on. We recorded like all the boys, Brian, Jeff, Jay. But when it came to Leonardo, we had to wait till Alan was going to be, you know, in the States and then do it all at one time. So he came in and like, we were all so excited. And me and Scott, of course, knew him, but like Dave, everyone on the crew of the Clerks cartoon was like, oh my God, it's him. And so Alan was like, we showed him the designs and stuff. And we're like, so yeah, man, just take it away. And Alan goes, if you don't mind, I really don't want to do Hans Gruber.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I know, but like it's a cartoon, so it's kind of, you can get away with it. And he goes, no, I can't get away with it. He's going, I'd rather, if it's cartoon, I'd rather do something.
Yeah.
I'd rather be animated.
Because it does look
like,
just like him, and specifically like Gruber.
Pitch perfect for that reason.
Yes.
And so, you know, I'm like, okay, man, like I trust you, go for it. And Alan's performance of Leonardo was a mimicry of Ross Perot, then presidential candidate, one-time failed presidential candidate.
Had an iconic voice. Yeah.
He did, and we have somewhere in the Disney library, because Disney produced the show,
in the vault
somewhere is 6 episodes worth of Alan doing Leonardo, but sounding more like, "Hey, you boys, you clerks, well played, clerks." Like, it was crazy because you'd see this voice coming out of his mouth, and you're like, I didn't know he could do that sort of thing. But it just didn't match like what we had the character doing.
Yeah.
And so we wound up Dave Mandel, because he worked on Saturday Night Live, and because other stuff he worked on, he became friendly with Alec Baldwin. And so Alec Baldwin came in and played Leonardo instead.
And he's basically doing his own Gruber impression.
Which we said. He was like, what do you want? And we were like, can you just do Hans Gruber? And he was like, okay. So he went for it. And then years later, I was on like Match Game or whatever Alec Baldwin was hosting. And, backstage, the hosts usually come by and say hi and stuff. And he was like, Kevin Smith, lovely to meet you. And I was like, we met before. You were in the Clerks cartoon. He goes, that's right. He's going, boy, I feel Hollywood.
It must be nice to be able to forget gigs that you've done. To have
in my world, every like Clerks, Mallrats happened yesterday, and I keep these things alive and milk them to death. But the people I work with, other than Jason Mewes, generally go on to other movies, and we're a memory of one thing that they did, if a memory at all. And that dude's storied career, he didn't instantly remember, but when I said it, he said that he did.
JJ, who does our research for the podcast, put in a couple notes of editorialization, as he is prone to do in the research document he gave us. And one of them is just, he called out, I think it's a fascinating recurring thread as we've been doing all these McTiernan movies, that McTiernan seems to be somewhat driven by his distaste for what other action movies were at the time, right? We talk about this being a movie that everyone sort of copies, that becomes the blueprint. And the commentaries I've been listening to that are recorded decades later, he talks about the ways in which he feels other movies, other filmmakers took the wrong lessons from what he did, missed the messaging of it. But there's that sort of feeling of like the obsession with infusing joy into this thing. Mm-hmm. Audiences don't go to
right down to the ode to joy when they open the fucking vault.
Literal for him. He was like, that was sort of the mantra of the set. It wasn't me being clever. It was like, I want that constantly being repeated over and over again. So there's the sort of like philosophy, the tone, the mood of what he thinks this movie needs to be in order for it to be enjoyable. But there's the other thing of, here's this guy who like went to AFI, who worked in commercials for a very long time, and basically spent a decade plus studying film construction like a science, getting incredibly technical about it. And he talks about how he was truly like, he would write up charts with shot lengths, just theoretically. Like he was working on like a theorem of just like, would it work if a shot was this long and then you cut it this length and directionally one shot was this way and the other shot was this way? He spends a lot of time being incredibly analytical and clinical about it. To 10 years later, when he's on the set of Die Hard, almost all of this is unconscious for him. And you read about how much of this movie was vaguely improvisational, that when they start filming, the script is like 30% of what it ultimately ends up being. But there are pieces like, well, we have Argyle at the beginning picking him up. He's sort of the framework of the movie. The realization of, oh, Argyle needs to be the one who's perfectly placed to back up, to stop the ambulance at the end of the movie, happened mid-flow. And when Ben and I saw this at Nighthawk with several rounds of drinks right before Christmas, and people are like hooting and hollering in the theater, the whole time I just kept on thinking to myself, like, it is frustrating how well organized this movie is. That was the term I kept on going back to, of just like, this movie is visually so well organized. It is narratively so well organized. It is like, it's like watching someone on the fucking Johnny Carson show do a plate spinning routine. And you're like, there's no way he's going to be able to make it over to that plate in time before it stops spinning. And you're just keeping track of all the plates in real time. And as you said, a lot of it was like out of necessity of, we need to make the other characters interesting enough that we have reasons to shoot them when we only have Bruce for half a day.
Right.
But rewatching it, I was, for how much this movie is a star vehicle, taken by how many long stretches of this film there are where it really feels ensemble-y, where McClane is just one of the characters.
I mean, think about it. In a world where they have more access to Bruce Willis, you probably don't get nearly as much Ellis.
No.
And Ellis, like for a side incidental character, is so memorable and so well drawn and performed.
Yes.
That like you're like, oh, when he goes, you're like, I mean, I get it for the story, but fuck, I like that guy.
Yeah.
Like, but because you liked him, you were even more invested. We're like, oh my God, they'll kill guys like that. Like,
tough that he goes off screen.
Yeah.
You don't even see it. That performance, obviously.
Who is that dude? Is Hart
Bachner?
Who later directed PCU and High School High.
Your favorite movie.
Bizarrely.
I believe his dad Lloyd Bachner?
Correct. Yes.
I'm not calling him out as a Nepo baby, but I think I remember his dad from
his dad was Lloyd Bachner, yeah.
Who was
Big
either
TV
on
guy.
Dynasty or I think Dynasty.
He was on Dynasty, He was on a million things. So
he was a legacy, this kid. But oh my God, he was magic. I remember watching the movie in the theater and being like, this guy's great, man.
McTiernan apparently had said to him, like, you're Cary Grant, like, play this like you're the classy guy. You're going to be the opposite of Willis. And Bachner was like, no, I want to be like on coke.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be like coked up. And McTiernan is like, oh God, no, I hate that idea. Don't do that. And Bachner just starts doing it. And Joel Silver just starts laughing and is like, let him do this. This is good. Like, this is going to work.
Well, it sounds silly, but it's like this whole movie is being, it's all driven by how do we make the building explode in a cool way, right? We're doing a thriller in a building. We're calling back to Irwin Allen. We're selling this poster that we have in our mind of the building exploding. And McTiernan keeps on going back to like, how do we make people care about the building? How do we make that fucking matter? Which is, you need to care about the people in it. Doesn't mean you need to like everyone in it, but you need to be fascinated by everyone. And everyone is so vividly drawn. And the first like 20 minutes of this movie, I guess it moves pretty fast. Maybe the first 15 are really set up everything on the board. And he is quietly, simultaneously, both teaching you the geography of everything so invisibly, right? Like all these kind of sweeping camera movements going in and out of rooms where you're just starting to be able to piece together in your brain, okay, I get it. This room connects to this room. This floor is here.
Yeah.
And also just very efficiently pinning every character in your mind where you're just like, everyone has their thing. It doesn't feel kind of gimmicky, but you're just like, everyone has a different look. A thing that I think a lot of filmmakers overlook very often is just like Hans Gruber's gang has 10 vividly, visually distinctive people in it.
It's true.
None of them are going to get to talk that much, but even the two Nordic Aryan guys have different vibes. The brothers have different vibes,
And picking Alexander Godunov.
Yeah.
Who's known at this point, of course, mostly, he's most famous as a dancer, but he starts breaking into pictures. Had he done
Witness? I feel like that's his
done Witness.
Thing. Yeah.
Oh, Witness! What a wonderful movie.
Witness,
that's right. That's his first time they use him as a blonde goddess.
The best movie
of a Amish. Oh,
yeah, one of your favorites.
That movie still said the gun. This is the gun of the hand. Oh, I love that fucking flick.
I love it. It's the best. We will do it on this podcast, obviously.
Yeah. Why do you think? Like, a side note, why do you think A Witness hasn't been remade yet?
That is a great question because it is the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And if I'm some Chris Pratt level star,
right,
who kind of is like, I need a vehicle, like it's like me, and like fucking remake Witness, or you don't even have to remake it, but just do that.
Yeah.
I'm a cop. There's a kid. I have to protect him. I have to go to the Amish, or I have to go to some community. Like, have you seen Witness?
Yes, of course.
Harrison Ford is John Book.
Yes. Yes, of course, John Book. No, I do think
he's hell at whacking, man.
We're talking about like the Willis career development, right? There was that kind of thinking that wasn't. I do think these things now often get reduced to like they need a franchise, right? If you're managing someone who feels like they're on the cusp of movie stardom or trying to maintain movie stardom, it's like give them a franchise that's going to keep the ball in the air. that gives them a safety net in between projects to go back and make another sequel to this. And those things are usually IP driven versus the sort of like character calculation of a John McClane, a movie that's on its face. This film does not feel like it should be able to spawn a franchise. It feels like this is a story and a character.
This is a thing that happened to this guy.
Are so circumstantial.
Well, I mean, how do you feel about
and then they
the
use
franchise?
that in the marketing of 2, where it's like, how can the same thing happen to the same guy twice?
Right.
I mean, like, how do you feel about Die Hard as a franchise? Because, like, Vengeance is great. The others are kind of, it's sort of up and down. And, like, it is weird that McClane keeps, suffering at the hands of terrorists and evil villains.
And the other weird thing we should acknowledge is all 4... No, let me get this straight. The Die Hards 2 through 4 all start as independent scripts that are then retrofitted into this could be a good Die Hard sequel. A Good Day to Die Hard is the only one that was actually explicitly written as a Die Hard sequel.
Right.
And they go back and forth on this.
Which is weird.
I loved him returning. I was eager for more McClane. So Die Hard 2 totally works for me, and still works for me to a large degree. Bringing back Bill Atherton, putting him on the plane with her, fun little callbacks like that, but they still managed to tell an original story that, like, you weren't like, oh man, this is a gross fucking grab at my dollar again. Right. It's like, nah, I buy it. Bad thing happened to this guy twice. And it also felt like, oh, they're going in the Irwin Allen theme. So they did a building. Now they're doing an airplane. If it would not have been out of the ordinary if Die Hard 3 had been about an earthquake or something like that.
Right.
But instead, of course, it went in a much more Pulp Fiction-y direction. That feels like Pulp Fiction informed what Die Hard 3 became, right down to the repairing of, well, not pairing, but 2 of the stars of Pulp Fiction being in the movie together.
But also, like, let's bring McTiernan back. We'll obviously cover this in its own episode.
Yeah, who was 2 Rennie Harlan? That was
correct.
2 is Harlan,
right?
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have. I ain't taking anything away from Rennie Harlan. Again, I love Die Hard 2, but it doesn't have the exact mix element that the first one had. That very rarely does a sequel capture all the magic, but you can feel a lack of McTiernan in that movie, but not in a way where it's like it's unwatchable. It's just, you can sense that, oh, this is in somebody else's hands.
David?
Yes?
I got a problem. I got a big issue.
What's that?
Well, when I'm looking for hand-selected, great cinema from around the world, I go to Mubi. I go to our friends at Mubi. I pull up Mubi.
We love Mubi.
That solves that problem for me.
Yep.
I got an unrelated issue that I don't think Mubi can solve.
What's that?
I don't know how to have sex.
Okay, listen.
I'm looking and listening.
Look, this episode is brought to you by Mubi, of course.
It is.
And they are presenting the new film, How to Have Sex.
Well, wait a second.
Which won the Uncertain Regard Prize at the Cannes Film Festival, and it follows these 3 British teenage girls on a rite of passage holiday where they're drinking and clubbing and hooking up in the streets of Malia, in Greece.
Feature debut from rising British filmmaker Molly Manning Walker, notably the cinematographer of Scrapper, one of your favorite movies of 2023.
An excellent film. But I do want to warn you that this is not really about how, like, the sex being had is often actually, quite, sort of complex and problematic. And it's about difficult situations that evolve. Like, it's definitely not a manual or anything like that.
It's not an instruction manual, but it's a film that I would enjoy watching.
It's a vibrant and authentic depiction of the agonies, ecstasies, and ride or die glory of young female friendship. It's a good movie. I've seen it.
I mean, this sounds like my kind of thing.
BAFTA nominee for British Film of the Year. It was at Sundance. It was at Cannes. It's gotten incredible reviews, and it's playing in theaters, and it is a cool movie to see in theaters because it is very sensory. It is, you are partying with these girls. Like, it's about this sort of crazy, sort of like overwhelming scene that they're in. So it's cool to be, locked in a theater with it, obviously.
Is Dr. Ruth still alive?
I believe Dr. Ruth is still alive.
Man, I'm definitely going to watch this film. It sounds right up my alley, but I'm also just like, I got to tackle this other
She's
problem.
95, so you want to give her a call soon. But How to Have Sex is now playing only in theaters. Visit Mubi.com/How to Have Sex, one word, to see showtimes and get tickets. That's MUBI.com/How to Have Sex.
I'm going back to this, like, why doesn't someone remake Witness question, right?
Sure.
Which I know sounds like a side tangent, but I do think it's connected to this, where you're like, this speaks to, Willis's agent at this moment being like, you're in the zone, you have the potential, and careers being planned out with this sort of big picture understanding of like, what are your innate qualities as a movie star that we need to bring to the fore and frame properly? And also, like, what are the different aspects of your relationship with the audience that we need to nurture? What do people like seeing you do? And what are the things they haven't seen you do that we need to try? So there was like a Willis persona, but it was also almost always in a vaguely romantic context. That was part of it. To start this movie with a guy who's fucking up, right? Who is not charming the woman of the movie, who is starting the movie in the doghouse fucking up. And I also think it's such an interesting choice to start the movie with this guy basically trying to fight off a panic attack, right?
Yeah. Make balls with your feet.
And trying to cover for it. This other guy is initiating a conversation with him that he would not have. He seems uncomfortable that a stranger is talking to him. This guy is more at peace with himself. This guy has figured out his own demons to some degree. Hey, this is what you do with your feet when you're panicking. And McClane's kind of like, okay, thanks, buddy. And then yet, still, the first moment he's alone, he's like, let me try out the thing that stranger told me.
But then it's so cruel. He needs to be shoeless. Like, that's why they do it, right?
And this is the shit where the first 15 minutes, you're like, every element of this movie is somehow setting up 3 elements at the same time.
Right.
Or at the very least, laying track, conveying information. I think about the introduction of the digital sign-in screen, right? Which is like, what are you accomplishing in this?
I know, like, this seems ridiculous, like, doing this business, yeah.
Right. You're setting up a little bit of like, this is how the Nakatomi Corporation works. This is very modern. This feels kind of hermetic. This is the sort of influence of Japanese culture onto our business that is like a rising sort of like consideration in the 80s. This guy, he's blue collar. He doesn't know from fucking touch screens. He doesn't get this. But also at the same time, you have the emotional beat of he's looking for his wife's name in there. He can't find it. Oh, it's under Gennaro.
No,
it's the maiden
huge.
name.
Right.
He's learning it in a show don't tell way.
And then for it to then play into like,
Correct.
That's why they don't know that they're related. And like, it's brilliant.
You're seeding that later. And you're just like, this is such a good movie. And I saw someone on our Reddit asking this recently, because we'll throw this term out, but like movies that teach you how to watch them.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like often that term is thrown out for movies that are like complicated, that have a sort of bracing or unconventional visual style or narrative structure or whatever. This is a movie that is on its face fairly straightforward, but is also incredibly complex of like, we're going to make an action movie with real emotional stakes and basically a Robert Altman-esque approach to tapestry of characters and subplots and different things you need to track happening simultaneously in real time. Like, this is like Nashville combined with an Irwin Allen movie, combined with a Dirty Harry movie. And there's just an efficiency to, John McTiernan being 10 years on from, there was a point where I was academic and technical and scientific about it, and now it's in my bones. I don't storyboard it. I can show up on set and kind of work this out in real time. And I'm not looking to make myself look good. I'm looking to get this across as cleanly as possible and to keep everyone's attention. And yeah, you just have these 15 minutes of like, you're meeting Argyle, you're meeting Ellis, you're meeting Holly, you're watching this guy fuck up, immediately followed by, feet and balls on the carpet.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like gunshot at maybe minute 15.
Maybe a little later than that. It's a long movie.
Yeah.
It kind of defies a lot of the rules of these kinds of movies. Like, I feel like a lot of Die Hard clones, like, we're not allowed to be more than like 95 minutes long. Like, we're not allowed to have like expansive casts like this one does.
18 minutes is when they shoot the security guard.
Sure.
So that's when like shit starts to unravel.
Right.
But you already
by then
you've
so established your world. All the players, are pretty much on the proscenium, have taken to the stage. And think about, you guys mentioned the feet thing.
Yeah.
You didn't have to set up the feet. He could have just been getting changed and like, it's an incidental thing that they don't spend a lot of time on. It could have happened. He could have not had his shoes on when the attack happens and whatnot. But how assiduously they deal with his feet to like really thread the needle, like from the plane to the, corporate offices where he's doing, what is it with his feet?
Making balls with his feet, making fists with his toes.
That's what it is. I keep saying balls, but it's fists with his toes.
Yeah, I don't know why.
And so, once again, you're close on his feet, but it's not, doesn't feel like foreshadowing. It's like, finishing a final thought from that plane thing. That's cute. That's cool. That's human. And it's only later on that you start to realize, it was all set up for the moment where he's like, shoot the glass. Like I remember being in the theater when you're sitting in the theater, and this happens at any age, but I was like 17 at the time, I believe, where you're like, he's going to shoot the glass because his feet are, that's badass. That's smart. I've never seen that in a movie before. That moment really didn't exist in mainstream movies prior to that. I'm certainly not saying that nobody ever did something smart in a mainstream movie, but generally people with guns were just shooting at each other or like shoot the gas truck so it blows up. Yes. But that guy going like shoot the glass, because I noticed when I talked with him, he has no fucking shoes, so he can't run around. It's like so simple and brilliant, and it was threaded in the opening moments of the movie.
There's nothing in this movie that isn't incidental. That is incidental, or is whatever. You know what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Everything.
There are no accidents in this movie.
Correct.
Everything
serves multiple purposes. Right. And the setup in and of itself is entertaining enough that you go, well, this is just them trying to infuse humor or character, personality into these moments. It'd be the obvious, laziest version of McTiernan's like, let's put joy in this movie. It's just, we'll find ways to make scenes a little more interesting. But then they look at whatever the joy is and they go, well, what could that serve later? What does that set up? How could that put a character deeper in the hole? I'm a dork who likes magic, right? And
are a dork.
I'm a dork who likes magic.
Okay, yes, yeah.
And there's the type of magic trick that is sort of dependent on the magician making you think that they fucked up the trick, where suddenly the whole audience leans in. You're like, oh shit, I'm seeing the rare night where the guy fucking blows it in front of a crowd.
Right.
And then you realize, oh no, the failure was a setup for the actual trick, which I think this movie does a million times, where you're like, the things I think it's setting up are actually often kind of red herrings.
Such as
the whole terrorism thing.
Well, obviously that.
They're making you focus on the wrong thing for so much of the movie, which is like...
The terrorism thing is brilliant because, it makes the villains smarter than they initially seem, right? You're like, oh, okay, these guys are running a con. That's kind of clever. Yeah. You're kind of like impressed by it.
Yeah.
It makes our police force and especially FBI, who are obviously the comic geniuses of the film, them coming in late, just seem like incompetent morons, which I love about this movie. That no one really knows how to deal with this in any significant way. And the more it escalates, the worse we get at it.
Yes.
It's a classic post-Vietnam movie thing where it's just America's completely ill-equipped to deal with anything like this.
Yeah.
Those are my points. I think that's it. I don't know.
Is there a little Beverly Hills Cop in the DNA of this movie?
I think there is.
Sure.
I think that's key. Yeah.
That predates this, right? Like
it does.
It's hey man, this is a guy who don't belong in LA and he's in LA, and because he don't belong in LA, that's why he's the guy for the job.
Totally. Yes. No, I mean, both of them are movies that basically have contempt. They're one good cop movies, right? Which people now look at with a little bit of itchiness, but they're movies that are like really looking at the absolute sort of like bone deep failure of our institutions at large. And then the only guys who work are the guys who basically see through the bullshit of everything else. It's not that they're playing by their own rule book. It's sort of more that they function like they're thinking of things as human beings first and not as cops and not as procedure, And that so much of it is you see that they are man of the people, that they relate to people directly as human beings on a one-to-one level. But yeah, it's so funny that like off of this movie, there then becomes this like action movie Mount Rushmore that is, well, Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and Willis. And they become, the three buddies who are doing Planet Hollywood. And when The Expendables comes around, well, even if it's cameos, the movie's not going to have any value if you don't get those three guys in one scene together for at least a minute. And you're like, Willis is the opposite of everything they're doing. Beverly Hills Cop happens similarly kind of by accident because Stallone drops out because he wants it to be tougher and bigger and bloodier. And that they're like, fuck, this movie's a moving train. We have everything set. We got to plug someone else in. Put in the unconventional guy. Put in the guy who would never be in an action movie.
The unconventional guy from television.
Yep. And the guy you wouldn't imagine in this type of setting. And in both cases, they're hiring the guy for the comedy and the relatability and whatever, and they're surprising people by over-delivering on, holy shit, this guy plays the stakes really well. You talk about the barefoot thing, right? Movies are weird to fucking shoot because you go wildly out of order. And as an actor, especially, the less verbal the script is, the less dialogue-based things are, it can be really fucking hard to track your character in this sort of disjointed, disorganized way. Action movies are that times a million because you have to shoot so many tiny little pieces, and especially a movie like this where it's like he's going back to every room 6 times. There are scenes that on paper maybe seem very similar to a scene he's already shot 3 times. How do you track the progression of this? Well, one of it is we know what his outfit is.
Yeah.
And we can constantly
the white, vest and
play with the visuals of the amount of damage he incurs, how dirty it gets, how made up he is, how much soot, how much blood. That's a thing that grounds the audience in understanding where he is in the progression, but also I have to imagine grounds Bruce in that. And then every time they remind you, oh yeah, and lest you forget, he's also barefoot. You have these moments where the movie kind of stops, where he has to take a breath and look at his feet and pull the glass out.
Yeah.
Kevin?
You said soot and blood.
Yes.
When you were talking about him. I just don't want it to go away.
Please.
And there was a moment in time where, I worked with Bruce as an actor in the Die Hard sequel, Live Free or Die Hard, and then as a director of the movie A Couple of Dicks, which was then named Cop Out. At one point in the shooting of Cop Out, he goes, you do close up of me here? I said, yeah. And he goes, you're not doing it right. I said, what do you mean? He goes, this literally to me and Dave Klein. He goes, blood, soot, sweat, dark. That's how you shoot Bruce Willis. And I was like, one more time. And he goes, blood, soot, sweat, dark. And he was like, think about it. And I did. And I was like, oh yeah. He's like, that's when I look my best. And the other thing for the audience at home,
you just gestured to the angles of your face while
sort
you were
of like spectacles, testicles. Yes. Yeah.
Very, very specific.
Yeah.
He mapped quadrants of his face with his hands to show where the blood, the soot, the sweat, and the dark went. He's like, that's how I absolutely look my best. If you're going to shoot a close up, you got to give me 1 or 3 of those elements. And then, the thing that he insisted upon, and I saw it over and over again while I shot the movie, and then it infected my work, and I still do it to this day, is throughout the shooting of anything, he's on camera, and your off-camera person is generally beside the camera or behind the camera, delivering the lines as you're shooting Bruce's coverage. Bruce would always go to the person who was off camera. He'd be like,
tilt the head.
While they were doing that, get closer to the lens.
Yeah.
And I would be like, what is that about? And he goes, lens is how you connect. He's going, I want my eye line as close to the lens as possible because that's me directly connecting with the audience. That's the secret. He always had the secret. And so for the rest of my career after that, like everything I shoot, I'm always like, can you get close? Can you just stand as close to the camera as possible so that the person off camera is not looking down the barrel at the camera, but close enough where the intimacy level completely changes. That's what Bruce Willis taught me.
I'm sure you've experienced this as well. It sounds like maybe before, up until the point you worked with Bruce Willis. But there's so many times I've been on set, you're shooting coverage, and then the DP goes, this is going to sound strange, it's going to feel strange. But actually what would help for eyeline is if you look at this corner of the map box, or you look at this C-stand, and they're going to stay where they are, and the voice is going to be coming from the other side of the room, and your body's going to be tilted in the wrong way, but I'm telling you, it will cut together. And they're right. On a technical level, they are right. It cuts together. I do think there's something you're missing. And even if you can feel it, and even if you're going off the muscle memory of, well, I did 6 takes where I was looking at them, and I kind of know what they're doing now, there is a difference. And what is captured on camera is always the energy you're sharing with another person or with your environment or whatever it is. So much of this movie is Bruce alone from when the first shots are fired, having conversations at a remote distance, or talking to himself, which is another thing that makes him a fucking movie star, I would contend, is this guy sells the notion of talking to himself so fucking well where it doesn't feel like a story cheat, where you absolutely believe, especially for a guy who is now reeling from the frustration of failing to have the productive, mature conversation, right? We've seen him have fun.
I guess, right? Like if he gets there and says to Bonnie Bedelia, like, you know what, I'm an asshole. Like, you know, how about after this party, we go out, grab dinner? And maybe she's like, you know, why are we going to the party? Let's leave now.
Yes.
And there is no movie. All that shit happens without them.
You buy it, and it's sort of seated in the first moment of him doing the fist with his toes. And he goes like, fist with his toes. Who knew it works? Like you're like, okay, this guy does sort of remark upon stuff.
Oh, and he does talk to himself. That's true. That's true.
He'll take a note. He'll sort of like, and it makes sense in kind of like a cop way of like, let me do the math. What's going on here? What am I not putting together?
Well, as we all know, you know, internet education teaches us that like the smartest people talk themselves through tasks. Like, you know, it used to be a time where if you talk to yourself, people are like, what are you talking about? But it's, you know, they found that folks that literally narrate their tasks as they're doing it are far more effective at the task. It adds a level of cognition because hearing yourself speak, your brain reacts faster, oddly enough, than just thinking a thought. So when you speak out loud in doing a thing, like, I'm going to move that can.
Right.
Your neurons are firing faster than you just thinking, I'm going to move that can. Well, I don't know how that works, but that's what I've
It's the version of like, hey, remind me to take this with me when I leave. When you say that out loud to a friend and they're like, I'm never going to remember that. You're like, no, but the fact that I just said it to you means that I'll remember it versus if I just thought it to myself. But he plays it so well. I mean, you were calling out me being very quiet in my impression of him at the beginning, but I think that's part of it is like, he's got a register and a pitch where you're like, this is the exact degree that this guy talks to himself out loud.
I don't think some of the, you know, other guys in this, like the Schwarzeneggers, I mean, I guess they sort of talk to themselves, but it doesn't feel natural like him.
No, he's got the, like, oh, fucking stupid, you idiot, kind of like, you're just quietly sort of doing the recap and then like, trying to think how to correct on the next
Because then you'd be dead too, asshole.
Right. You know, like, you'd think that I mean, this script made it, obviously, but like, everyone would be like, well, he spends the whole movie either talking to himself or talking on a walkie-talkie. Like, is that going to work? Like, it's kind of a challenge to throw at an actor.
Yes.
And yes, you're helped by the fact that the rest of the cast is so winning that if you're not with him, you're still with the movie.
Yeah, and as the stakes of the movie increase, then every 10 minutes you're like, right, and he's fucking barefoot too.
He doesn't have any goddamn feet.
Like there are these things they keep on sort of pinning in. I mean, the establishment of the one undeveloped room that has the cutouts, the like Playboy pinups, right? Where the first time it's just the gag of like, oh, well, here's the kind of guy he is. He can't walk past it without doing a double take and looking at the naked lady.
Sure.
And then starts to become every time he's back through that office, he taps the picture.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, that's a funny character detail, but it's also reminding us, I know why this room is different from the other room. I remember where this room is. Yeah. And McTiernan, the commentary is with him and Jackson Degovia, who is the production designer. And he said McTiernan kept on saying to him, this is a jungle movie.
Right.
I don't want to think of this as like a skyscraper movie.
Right.
And he's obviously coming right off of Predator. And the thing that excited him most is like, you have the Nakatomi offices, which are really kind of garish and over-designed. And this idea of like, it was very Frank Lloyd Wright inspired. They've sort of bought these expensive art pieces and reconstructed them and everything. And then you have all these like unfinished, undeveloped rooms where he's just in this weird kind of like literal urban jungle of just steel beams and open walls.
Do you know what the film was called in France and Spain?
What?
The Crystal Jungle.
Well,
isn't that interesting?
It is.
Yeah. I remember I had this on DVD.
Wait, Die Hard was called The Crystal Jungle?
Yep. But probably because Die Hard is not something that translates. Like right?
What's the remember the episode of Rick and Morty where the dude, you know, the interstellar guy like is a huge Die Hard fan. He's like, in my world, it's called this. On this planet, it's called this.
Right, but that's another example of that episode is all based on the idea of everyone referring to it as doing a Die Hard.
Right.
Where it's almost become like one of the great forms of storytelling. Die Hard, the title comes from Last Boy Scout. That Shane Black had titled Last Boy Scout. It didn't come from
the Battery?
Well, this is what they're saying, that
sure.
The studio was hesitant because of the Battery.
Right.
To give it that title. But Last Boy Scout had been called Die Hard. Joel Silver also had that script.
Right.
Was developing that at the same time.
That gets made a couple years later.
Yeah. And was like, Shane, do you mind if I just take that title and place it over here instead?
Wow. When, like, you did Live Free or Die Hard. That's a movie that's not a Die Hard movie until it gets turned into a Die Hard movie, like we said, right? Like, what is is there a Die Hard, like, infrastructure at that point? Like, are there people who are like, we're guardians of the Die Hard world? There isn't really, right? Like, it's kind of the
just
problem.
Bruce
no,
at that
the
point?
exact, by the time we're doing, and I can say we because I was in the movie, by the time we were doing Live Free or Die Hard, it was the Fox flick, and Hutch Parker was in charge of it, but he hadn't been around when the earlier ones were made.
Yeah.
McTiernan didn't direct Live Free or Die Hard, obviously. That was Lenny Wiseman. So, you're already kind of removed from the formula. There's no Kevin Feige to the Die Hard universe that I saw, except for Bruce. And there was a moment, I've told the story like a zillion times before, but when I first got to Live Free or Die Hard, I was supposed to work one day, and I wound up being there a week because there was like this kind of slow / shutdown of sorts going on between Bruce and the studio. They'd been shooting for months already, and then they were finishing in Los Angeles with stage-based stuff, and my character, the Warlock, had a fucking mom's
you were a hacker
basement
man. Yeah.
I was a hacker.
You were the hacker.
So when I get there, he's like, we're not shooting. We're not doing this. And he turns to me and goes, Kev, and I'd never met him before at this point. Like, it was just on Live Free or Die Hard that we met. I'm a massive fan. And he turns to me, he's like, Kev, basically we've been shooting this movie for like almost a year. And every problem we've ever had, we say, you know what? We'll do that in the Warlock scene. So now we're at the Warlock
You're
scene.
the cleanup for all of the narrative issues, basically.
Yeah.
So he's like, we need to answer a lot of things that we left open until this moment in time. And I don't think the scene does that. And I was like, well, I could take a shot. Skip was the screenwriter, but he was like, you want to go off with Skip and take a shot at it? I was like, sure, man. What do you want to say? And Bruce told me all the stuff he wanted to say, and like all the stuff that would tie things up. About Mr. Gabriel or whatever the hell. And then I went off with Skip to his trailer, and we wrote a new version of the Warlock scene. I gave it to Bruce, and Bruce was like, this is great. This is everything. This is the scene I want to do. We're shooting this. And they sent it to the studio. And I guess the studio was like, whoa. This has nothing to do with what we've been doing so far. We didn't approve these pages, blah, blah, blah. So we had stopped. We were just waiting because Bruce wanted to shoot the scene. The studio didn't want to shoot that scene. Len was caught in the middle. And in this standstill, Bruce had his personal chef make chicken fingers for everybody and stuff. We all had Bruce chicken while we sat around barbecuing, telling stories, waiting to figure out what was going on. And then I saw one of the swaggiest Hollywood moves I've ever seen in my life. Something that would come out of a script about making movies, Hollywood movies and shit. So Hutch Parker is on a flip cell phone with Bruce Willis. It's finally come to this head. We're not shooting until Bruce gets the answer he wants. And so the studio and the person of Hutch Parker calls, and we're all sitting around outside of his trailer, and they're like, studio, it's Hutch. And they give him the phone, and Bruce is standing there amongst us. And so he goes, Hutch, so I want to shoot this scene as is. And we don't hear the other side of the conversation, right? All we hear is Bruce. And he's like, uh-huh. He's going, yeah, but this answers a lot of the questions. Okay. All right. Hutch, let me ask you this. Who's your second choice to play John McClane.
Right. Hell yeah.
He goes, that's what I thought. Okay, bye. And he hung up and we went and shot the scene that he wanted to shoot. So if there was any gatekeeper, it's the guy who'd been there for every Die Hard. It was John McClane. He was like looking to safeguard his character, make him consistent, keep things in a Die Hard world and stuff. But was also like, knew exactly how powerful he was as well.
Well, to be fully candid, that is a movie I have a lot of struggles with. But that your sequence, I'm not just saying
PG, it being PG-13 is the thing I bumped into the hardest. Everybody did, especially
right. That sort of
especially because he doesn't get to utter the full yippee-ki-yay motherfucker.
Yes, the gunshot cuts it off. I remember
that. I think is a problem, and I also think there's just like an era problem where a Die Hard movie needs to be of a certain size, and the size of movies at that point in 2007 has gotten like so gargantuan. And so the scale of it needs to be bigger, and he needs to be hanging off the wing of a plane and driving cars into helicopters and stuff like that. That feels a little removed from the heart of who McClane is. I think Justin Long is funny in that movie, but I also think the dynamic is a little too much like, here's a guy that McClane can bounce jokes off of, versus you watch this and McClane has this interesting balance of like, he wants to be weary, above it all, smart-assy, but there is this part of him that is like a mensch, that just immediately connects to anyone else who's reaching out to him as a real person, And I feel like
you could tell with Justin, since it's Joel Silver, it's the DNA of the fast-talking, new to the franchise character probably finds the seeds in Leo Getz in Lethal Weapon.
Yes,
when
absolutely.
Joel Pesci joins, and suddenly, you're like, hey, I like my Lethal Weapon formula. And they have this guy, and you're like, he really brings something to the mix. He's funny as hell, and he's putting our characters on the back foot. Same thing they were able to accomplish, like with Justin's character, where they're like, at this point, Die Hard, by the time they do Live Free or Die Hard, we're how many years removed from the original Die Hard?
20?
And even though it's very well known, of course, as you mentioned, movies have gotten bigger and more bombastic. So they're hedging their bets by being like, let's get somebody in there to comment on the action, to heighten the fact that John McClane is an analog man in a digital world.
Yeah, but I also think, you're comparing it to Leo Getz, and the difference is like Getz is the annoying like third guy.
Right.
Intercepting a like perfectly honed duo act. Versus McClane has this weird, like, he is a lone wolf, but it's kind of because he fucks up his own relationships. He wants to connect to other people, but he keeps on getting in his own way a little bit.
It is tough in Live Free or Die Hard that he is divorced at that point.
Right.
And you're like, look, that makes sense. This guy seems impossible to be married to.
Yes.
But it's so, the juice of Die Hard is that they figure it out. Like, is that they're walking off together.
That's when you see the secret weapon of Die Hard, the previously heretofore in this episode unsung Bonnie Bedelia.
Yes.
There's 100%. A reason you go on the journey and you give a shit about his love life, because like all the power and intensity that she has to stand up to her husband in that scene and be like, you got to remember when this movie was made. It's not too far removed from Mr. Mom, right? Which was like a movie about, oh my God, women entering the workplace while the man stays home, or the man, the woman is doing a job while the man is also doing a job. So it was early enough for that to be a factor in the plot, where it's just like, well, here's something new. She got a job and she moved to the other coast.
And as you said, most other movies that are dealing with that is the central premise, and it's a comedic premise calling out how unusual that is, versus this is part of just the table setting of the movie. And it's one of the fundamental character flaws of McClane, is that he clearly has struggled to adapt to this, right? And like you look at their relationship, and it would be so easy to make him just a piece of shit, right? In a way that would fuck up the movie at large. To have him really step in it and do something horrible, or set up a really bad sort of history of whatever in their relationship, versus like, this guy stopped doing the work. It is so clear. She plays it so well. where she is so frustrated because all she wants is for him to show up and do the fucking end of Jerry Maguire's speech where he's like, I figured it out. I've been a fucking child. I've been a moron. I'm ready to show up and like reinvest in this marriage and fucking do my side of the heavy lifting.
Right.
And instead he keeps on just sort of stumbling over it, you know? And she's sort of like, I keep opening doors for you to step up to the plate.
And you know what's this is Bonnie Bedelia is a great choice.
Who was she? I don't have much of a sense of who she was before Die Hard.
Who she was for me before this movie came out was she was in a movie called Heart Like a Wheel.
Yes. Oh yeah, she got a Globe nom for that.
Maroney.
Right.
Yeah, like she played the race car driver.
Right.
So I you know that was in high rotation on the movie channel in the early days of cable. So that's what I was most familiar with her from. Is Presumed Innocent before or after that? I think it's after.
That's like a year or two later. That's 1990.
I mean, she had the 1-2 punch of Die Hard and Presumed Innocent. And Presumed Innocent is a fantastic, Alan J. Pakula, twisty-turny courtroom thriller where you want to talk about a monologue. She gets a monologue in the third act of that movie. That's a stunner.
That movie rules.
She's so stealth. Bonnie Bedelia.
Yeah.
You cast Meryl Streep, you cast Emily Blunt. You're like, you know what you're going to get, and there's going to be great performance. But she is so stealth because nobody's expecting her to be the powerhouse.
No.
And I think that's why it was so smart to cast her. I don't know if it was because she was huge at the moment or something like that, but it was a very human choice for Holly McClane.
He liked her in Heart Like a Wheel. Like, I think, had a lot of respect for her as an actor. It is like her and Reginald VelJohnson. It's like you're not picking the biggest name.
Yeah.
Like, supposedly the studio wanted Robert Duvall for Reginald, for Al Powell. Which like, you're like, that's crazy. It overpowers the movie.
Yeah.
But also, he's picking these pretty warm actors, The
moment you're paying Bruce Willis $5 million, you're not going to be able to pay.
Well, that's another. I was
going to say, I think it doesn't balance it.
You've salary capped yourself.
Yeah, you're money balling right now. So you've given a lot of money to that guy.
So it's like, I don't know, this guy was in a play I liked. Give me the main villain.
Moneyball's a great analogy. It's like they've gotten themselves in this situation where they overspend on Willis so much that they actually just have to cast for ability and type.
But they also need like the pitcher who throws weird, and that's why they can get him.
You just need to get on base. Like they are using sabermetrics where they're like, don't think of this as a commercial calculation. Who fits on the poster? Think about what gets us on base. We have to like Al Powell. We have to hate Hans Gruber.
She is fantastic. She's her maiden name is Culkin, and she's Macaulay Culkin's
aunt.
Which is funny.
Culkin dad's
Are you serious?
sister. She is the aunt.
Right. She's the sister of
the
Kit
Culkin.
Culkin. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
The notorious parent of the Culkin family.
Which once you know it, you really see it.
And like,
now it rewrites history where I'm like, wait, all the Culkins are Nepo babies?
They're all Bedelia nephews?
Yes. the
most insidious type of Nepo baby.
I mean,
I had no idea, man. That's crazy. What a weird connection.
Yeah.
When she was in the Parenthood show, which is 30 years later.
Yeah.
Where, she's like the grandma. She's like the matriarch. Did you ever watch the Parenthood show?
I never did.
She's wonderful in it.
Yeah.
But I was truly like, where has she been?
Yeah.
Like, obviously she's in Die Hard 2. That's kind of, and Presumed Innocent. I feel like I just, you don't hear much from her. She works throughout the 90s. She's got credits.
You're right. There's a bit of a slowdown in the early 2000s.
I don't know. I mean, like the other big thing she had done is Salem's Lot, the Stephen King TV adaptation of that.
That's right.
That's her other
she
big
was
role.
on Salem's Lot with David Soul.
Yeah. But like her, VelJohnson, even someone like Paul Gleason, like I remember Ebert's review, which is kind of notorious, is like there's too many like chiefs that we keep cutting to.
Yeah,
because there's like sort of three of the same guy, right? Like
it sounds like such an Amadeus note. Like too many chiefs.
Too many chiefs. like so there's like because there's Paul Gleason and then there's William Atherton, who's not a chief, he's a reporter, and then you've got fucking Johnson and Johnson. Like, and it's like it's a lot, but like that's the point to me is like what Gruber is creating this like forest from the trees situation.
It's the other movie that I think this film cribs from a lot in a really smart way is like, what if you turned Dog Day Afternoon into a full-on action thriller.
Yeah, no, good call.
Right? Because it has that similar, like, three-ring circus kind of thing. You know, you have a hero weaving between, there's the sort of law enforcement, there's the crime at the center, you know, there's the tension within the building, and then there's the media.
Right.
There's the public.
Like, think about, like, Inside Man, the Spike Lee movie, is kind of a version of this where Hans Gruber is the hero.
Right.
Yes. That's totally true. And again, where the guy is like, people will be so distracted by the one crime, they won't realize the actual crime that I'm pulling off.
Yeah,
right.
I'm certainly not saying that's also a Die Hard movie.
No, but
it kind of is. I mean, it's
sort of a
mirror
inversion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But there's so much clever abstraction in this movie where, I mean, I know we're jumping all around, but it's like the moment where you're like, is this one of the greatest movies ever made? Am I watching one of the greatest movies ever made? Is when Hans and McClane come face to face and you watch Hans Gruber realize that McClane doesn't know who he is.
Right.
That McClane
slips into, oh God, and he goes into his American accent.
Bill Clay.
Yes.
Which that sequence is so much shorter than I always remember.
Yeah, you're always like, okay, this is an entire 20 minutes. It's 2 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's like a trick. Once again, you talk about like a magic trick that this movie does over and over again, which is it is teaching you the stakes, the rules, the relationships, the geography so well, but distracting you from what do the characters know? Because we have this omniscient God view of the whole situation. And what we're forgetting is every character has a specific sliver of their own understanding. Law enforcement gets this. The media is reporting on it this way. So the public thinks the story is this. Inside Nakatomi Plaza, what do people think?
Right.
And then you have these moments where, like, you get to have the audience do the math in their head and go, oh, right, he wouldn't know what his fucking face is.
Yeah.
Gruber's taken stock of everyone who's in the building because he knows it's just the holiday party.
Right.
So if he sees a face that he hasn't seen by process of elimination, it has to be the cowboy. But McClane hasn't seen almost anyone at the party because he was going in just trying to talk to his wife, ignoring everyone at the party, being annoyed by all these phonies, you know?
Should we talk about the explosions? They're very good. I'm trying to think of like what else in Die Hard we need to touch on.
Let's hit the Bill Clay scene real quick. In the lore of the making of that movie, I seem to remember some sort of like, oh, we added that. Like it wasn't in the script. We added it because Bruce was like, I don't have a scene with Alan.
Yeah.
That makes sense because when it happens in the movie, you kind of are like, really? Like we've done a lot of movie. Like we're going to have them meet now and like have this whole like, and that's why it is fast, I think. But it is crucial that they see each other before the showdown at the end.
Yes.
Okay, you agree with me.
No, I agree.
I think that scene works.
Wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
No, it's like every 20 minutes, it feels like this movie it adds another layer onto the cake, right? Where you're like, Powell maybe doesn't come in until minute 45, close to an hour. Like it takes a while. The Gruber's gang comes in around 20 minutes. The Johnsons aren't introduced until like an hour and 30 minutes.
They make me laugh so much.
But there's such a delicate sort of Jenga tower being built as this whole situation gets more and more out of control.
Yeah. Just Robert Davi saying like it's just like Nam, and the guy being like, I was in junior high. That guy is the best name. What's his name? The other guy. Grand L. Bush is the other actor. That guy's great.
Is his real name?
That's his real name. I mean, it's his Hollywood name at least. I don't know.
And then who is it? Is it Rick Overton? Is in The Street?
Is that right?
Rick Overton.
I can't turn this off. Like, I shut this.
Is it Rick Ducommun?
Rick Ducommun. That's it.
I always get over
the guy who's like, yeah.
He was a comic in the 80s.
Yes.
I saw him on a lot of stand-up stuff, and they gave him the perfect kind of one scene comic relief sequence that seemed to have been necessitated by like, we don't have Bruce Willis every day, so let's shoot a scene out here.
Yeah, but there's also just it much like the Dog Day Afternoon thing. Part of the fun for the audience is watching this situation somehow bleed and get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Talking about the sort of like film grammar of this movie, right? And it's sometimes cited as like the first movie to do this. It certainly gets credit for being like the first mainstream major studio movie to do this.
Right.
But talking about the 10 years of McTiernan in the lab where he's trying to like experiment with the language of film and then reapply it in the least pretentious way possible, he was obsessed with the notion of cutting on movement.
Sure.
Which the dogma was, no obvious joke intended there. You cannot do that. You complete a camera move, the camera lands and stays in place for a couple of seconds for the audience to settle before you cut out of it. And it was much like when D.W. Griffith was cutting from like one room to another. People were like, you can't do this. Audiences are going to vomit. They will think they've transported through space. Yeah. There was this feeling of like, you are going to physically disorient people, not to like a crossing the line way, but they will get ill if you cut on movement.
Yeah.
And he was
you're going to Pikachu these people if you cut from one room to another.
It is wild that people forget that Pikachu is the thing that gave everyone seizures, because it was like 2 years before Pokemon came to the US. It was its own news story enough to be later a Simpsons
there's a
episode.
Kids cartoon that gave people like epilepsy.
Right, you were
Japan.
like, it was Pikachu.
Yeah, it's and Porygon, not to be nerdy, but he's fighting Porygon in that episode.
But he was like,
oh shit!
I mean, just
deep cuts reveal there.
When McTiernan's at AFI, when he's making short films, when he's doing commercials, he had cut a lot of his own work, and like a lot of guys who work in commercials, they were like, "This is my playground to test out things I can hopefully apply to movies later."
Yeah.
And he studied a lot. How does the human eye observe a frame? How do I compose a frame so that they start looking over here, and then when their eyes start to naturally drift over to this corner, I'll move the camera over to link that up to the next story point I want. I mean, there's so much of this movie that's like, you're following Al Powell on the ground and the camera pans over to the side of the building and you're connecting now. Okay, so he's here and there's that, whatever. But he also was
there's that one shot, the one shot I always love where they're on the ground and they're looking up at the top of the building and you're just seeing flashes of light.
Yes.
Then you cut to the building and it's a full-blown firefight, louder than fuck, dangerous as hell. But from a distance on the ground, it's just little flashes at the top of the building.
Transitions are so good. Or there's one moment where Al Powell radios into, I guess, his superior, and the camera's like on tracks moving alongside with him, and then you catch in the background a police car turned over. And you're like, oh, that's the collateral damage of the chase that is now happening surrounding this. Like, you're just very quickly getting seeded, the stakes of all of this expanding. But he was like, this is my fucking playground to prove this point that you can do this. And beyond that, that's the way to make this, you were saying, an action movie. It's got to move, right? It's a movie. I want McClane constantly moving. I want the camera moving. I want to move through space.
I think what happens in stuff like the guy in the street who's like, I gotta shut the power down. We were talking about cutting to the outside world.
Yeah.
Most of the people's reactions in Die Hard, most of the characters across the boards don't track from any previous action movie, which is why it works really well. Like, in a real action movie, like they're like, cut that fucking cord, and the guy's like, aye, sir, and they do. There's not this moment of like, well, I don't want to get in trouble for cutting everything and blah, blah, blah. Everything is humanized and everybody reacts in a way that is identifiable, where you're like, that'd probably be the way I'd react, as opposed to traditionally in movies, everyone had the right thing to say, the right thing to do, the script armor is covering them. And this was not the first, but definitely one of the first in recollection, where it felt like, okay, whatever they normally do, we're going to have them react like a real person would react.
Absolutely. And also, like, none of these characters feel like plot functions, even the ones who are, because they all are vivid, specific, and relatable enough to some kind of everyday human behavior that you're like, well, I could see a whole movie of just this guy, right? Which then, like, Family Matters comes out of, why wouldn't you put this guy fucking Tuesday nights at 8 o'clock? I want to see this guy with his family.
For freaking 10 years.
Have him bring the same fucking uniform over.
I mean, I know that show is the Urkel show or whatever, like that's what it quickly became, but like it was on for 9 years. Yes. Family Matters.
And the only reason it existed was, as you said, becomes the Urkel show off of, this is basically the Sergeant Al Powell spinoff show. Let's just not pay the rights, but get him as a cop at home, sort of like world weary in the same kind of way, but with a good heart.
Yeah.
There was that one episode where he does the long monologue to Urkel about shooting a kid. It is like a Die Hard. And you're like, oh yeah.
Right.
I mean, obviously there's no way you could do it now. Like it's so objectionable that the redemption arc is like, oh, he can fire his gun again. This cop who shot a kid.
Yes.
Right. Now he gets to go back in the field.
And like there's not even a caveat in it of like, oh, he shot and wounded somebody. He like, it's like, no, he killed a kid, right? That's the implication.
Absolutely. It is
a 13-year-old, right? Yeah, like who had a water gun. Like they don't even really sugarcoat it.
I just have to imagine that the Fox brass every year as this movie continues to play and continues to grow in like film history is just like, what a fucking gift that it's a black cop and at the end of the movie he shoots the most Aryan looking dude in the world. Because if you flip this movie would just be like, it's so hard to touch today.
It's and
it's wild to watch it and be like, I still, even with the 35
this is in the book. It's this is built all the way back into the book. Al Powell shooting the villain at the end is all the way to Nothing Lasts Forever, whatever the book is called. Yeah.
It's just wild that the movie gets you to the place where you're like, I want to see Al Powell shoot again. It's making you root for that sort of cathartic release, but it is the thing of like, this guy just isn't processing his shit. You know?
Sure, yeah.
And mind you, it's in the denouement. We've already been satisfied.
Right.
As an audience, the hero has survived, the villain has been killed, the building blew up, we saw spectacle. And so we're total denouement. He's reunited with his wife. She gets to punch William Atherton.
Yeah,
and then that's great. All of a sudden, in the midst of all this, wait, this guy's not dead. Oh my God, he's gonna get John McClane. No, he didn't. Who got him? And you're like, oh.
And it's
redemption
obviously
for Al Powell.
Right. It's it's clockwork stuff. Yes.
It's the thing that you forgot was still left on the shelf.
Now it's clockwork stuff.
Now.
Even when we saw it in the theater, though, it wasn't clockwork yet. So you were like, whoa.
No. I mean, I can only imagine like the theater exploding. I wish, I could just go back in time and watch these fucking movies.
Let's take a moment to sing the praises of William Atherton.
Please.
Because if I had had my way, I would have worked with 3 people from Die Hard. The role of Mr. Svenning from Mallrats, who was written for William Atherton.
Why did we sent it
to him. We sent it to him, and he was like, "I don't want to play this role anymore." But
like he's sick of being the tight ass kind of. Yeah, sure.
But I think he meant, I don't want to play this role anymore for this little amount of money, because like a year later he did Biodome and he did play that guy.
Yeah, and he he's in the new Ghostbusters this year, right?
Yeah,
like he's coming back. But it's Michael Rooker in Mallrats, right? I mean, we
got lucky in as much as like our rebound was Michael Rooker, for heaven's sakes. But yeah, I loved Bill Atherton naturally because of this and Ghostbusters, the 1-2 punch and whatnot. But like later on in my career, I was like, oh, let's get the guy from Die Hard, man.
Well, it's funny because like,
did you get that? I mean, he's so funny in Die Hard.
He is the one guy in this movie who's coming in with the sort of like shorthand casting that we're saying this movie otherwise can't employ, perhaps because of budget.
Yeah.
Where the second he's introduced, you're like, I get it. The newsman is Walter Peck.
Yeah.
I have a cultural language for him. I'm like locked and loaded.
You're like, I know this man. This man has no dick.
Exactly. I mean, he talks a lot about.
He does have no. He talks a lot about how that really hurt him. People are yelling at that from cars and all that.
Children yelling at it from school buses. Because he also, you realize,
and it bugs him.
Yes, he was the male lead in Sugarland Express, Spielberg's first theatrical movie. He's Spielberg's first leading man, basically. And then he found himself in this very lucrative corridor, working in some of the most popular movies of the next decade, but always playing the guy who the hero fucking hated, and the audience can't wait to see get embarrassed. And it was just like, the dickless thing was just such a clean handle of like, for that to be the joke that everyone's going to repeat to you on the street. But not only that, it's Ghostbusters. So it's not just drunk adults at bars, it's children. It's like 5-year-olds pointing at you and saying, kids. This man has no dick.
That is pretty bad. We did in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, there's a running gag where people are screaming, Affleck, you the bomb and Phantom, yo. And Affleck, like years later, was like, "Oh my God, He's like, do you know
now everyone
how
actually
often
says it?
Yeah.
He's like, how often
idiots.
strangers will scream at me. He's like, sometimes I'm with my children and they'll scream, Affleck, you the bomb and Phantom Joe. He's like,
That's
you.
so funny though, as a full circle moment, because like when you write the joke is that's not the thing that anyone would say to Affleck. If people are coming up to Affleck on the street, that's the last thing they'd be yelling at him. And then by synthesizing it in the movie, it becomes the thing that ironically people say to him.
I've never seen Phantom. Is Phantom good?
My entire cultural relationship to that movie is Affleck, you the bomb.
I would agree. Right. Isn't there like Peter O'Toole in that or something?
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's
Peter O'Toole is in it. Absolutely. There's just this the moment that Jay's character like says no, it's they're having a conversation. It's Jay and Silent Bob and Holden McNeil from Chasing Amy. And he goes, Ben's delivery is pitch perfect because he's the one I believe that says it first. He's like, they were talking about Good Will Hunting, and he's like, yeah, I wasn't a fan. And he looks over, he's like, but Affleck was the bomb and Phantom Joe. And fucking Jay's like, word, Phantom's like a motherfucker. Well, so he signed his own death warrant by saying the line himself.
He
knew. The joke is sort of more on the characters of why would that be the one? And then the joke is intensified by being repeated over and over again. But I have to
that person's face.
Right. I have to imagine a lot of people think that it's a movie you made up for a joke in your movie.
Right. It is such a forgotten
film. When they discover there's an actual Phantom, they're like, is he the bomb?
Literally, that movie came out the same year that he was in Shakespeare in Love and Armageddon. I assume it was shot, before Good Will Hunting or whatever. But yeah,
I mean, it's the story I've told too many times on this podcast. But when I went up to Neil Patrick Harris and said, "I love your work," and Undercover Brother, and he just turned to me and went, "That one." That one? He didn't say thank you. He went like, "Why are you saying that to me?"
Hey man, he was the bomb in Undercover Brother.
He was.
Are there any other big? I mean, like
thing I want to say.
Now I have a machine gun. I don't know. Like
thing I want to say about the camera movement.
Go ahead.
This is big,
Go
right?
ahead.
But he was just like, I'd have this argument with studios, and they'd say it's impossible. And he's like, I've shot footage and cut it myself, and I know it's possible.
Sure,
I know it's difficult.
Cutting on action. Yeah.
Right. He used the term that I thought was really interesting, where he said you have to find sympathetic images. You have to be aware of the images you are constructing individually to make sure they will feed into each other.
Right.
And that you're thinking about the timing of how they process information. But he was like, the worst thing that could happen is you're filming the movie, the studio's getting the rushes, they're looking at the footage, watching it without you while you're on set and going, this guy doesn't know what the fuck he's doing before it's cut together. McTiernan talks a lot about, he basically cuts in camera in a way that can be a little confusing because he's not doing conventional coverage unless he's assembled it in the correct order. And he was like, I need to hire Verhoeven's guys because Verhoeven does this in his Dutch movies. And he did it a little bit in RoboCop. But he's like, get the editor of RoboCop, get de Bont. They're both fluid in this language. They'll know how to take my direction on set and process the images in editing so that they'll have my back. Because he's like, the worst thing that fucks you is you have an editor who's not aligned with your vision. The studio watches the rushes and they go, are we crazy or are these bad? And the editor goes, yeah, this guy doesn't know what the fuck he's doing.
Right.
Then you're done. Then they start to put the vice grip around you. And he said they were so worried about it that he didn't want to create a contingency plan where he didn't have movement in the shots. But for the first 2 weeks, they did alternate takes at different tempos of movement where they timed out. Is it better if it's on like a 2/5 movement or whatever it is? And then after 2 weeks,
that is so deep cuts right there. That's a commitment to storytelling on a movie that you wouldn't think
rather
someone
than
was
just
putting in that much thought.
Giving up and being like, yeah, fine. If the studio's being a pain about it, let's just shoot coverage.
And he was like 2 weeks in, there was no pushback. They were seeing the results, and I was hearing the edit that it was working.
That film was nominated for its editing at the Oscars. Like, the editing is top notch.
But he gets into I'm just trusting my judgment on this now. I'm not doing the math. He doesn't storyboard anything other than effect shots. Because he's like, I work organically. I see it in real time. It's mathematical. It's about the space. It's about the people. I don't want to have to lock myself into something. And looking for these gifts that come out of the surroundings. I mean, the art direction in this movie is so fucking good because I talk about I mentioned the Playboy pinup, but there's so many little details like that where he builds these spaces with central objects so that he knows if I'm cutting quickly, if I'm moving around, you understand which room you're in or which side of rooms they're in, because here's the fountain, here's the art sculpture, here's where there's the rebar or the desk or whatever it is, you know? But yeah, it's like, it is so impeccably constructed in a way that makes me borderline angry.
Don't be angry.
I watch this movie and I go like, I don't understand how anyone could have the clarity of thought to keep all of this straight and coherent, let alone entertaining on top of that, which then takes charm.
Never has so much effort been put into like telling essentially a make pretend story. So much logic to make it feel as real as possible. And, you know, and I guess that's what we do in movies, generally speaking, but they kind of went out of their way. And we talked about before the screenwriting, who knows what, and blah, blah, blah. Somebody recently told me that was the key to writing, you know, for the studio, like writing huge, successful studio blockbuster movies. It's all about information denial.
Yeah.
Like when your main character knows something, when the audience knows something, when the villain knows something, and at any given moment, all three parties cannot know the same thing. Like there has to, if the villain is concocting something, such as in Die Hard, where he's presenting himself as a terrorist, but really he's just a bank robber, that information is denied to us for a long time. But that information is known by the villain himself, and the information is not known by the hero. And then we get that information before the hero gets the information. The hero doesn't even really need that information, but we are informed at a certain point. It's all about when you let people know something that one of the characters or the main characters do. It was a real interesting breakdown where I was like, fuck, I wish I was a good writer, because then I would just follow that formula and stuff. But it made sense when I thought about it.
Especially with like popular entertainment, you know, you talk about spending your hard-earned money, going to the movie theater on a Friday night and wanting the kind of experience you had with your friends seeing Die Hard opening weekend, where the audience is like falling in love with a real thing in real time and getting more and more excited by the moment. The thing that's so electric are those aha moments where the audience fucking figures it out. And especially if they figure it out a second or two before the characters do, they start to feel like personally invested in what's happening.
Right.
You know?
You're a collaborator at that point. You're no longer just an audience member. You're kind of a collaborator with the story as well. Like you're in on it at that point.
And it's like a difficult trick to pull off of how do you make sure the audience understands everything that's going on without spoon feeding it to them so that they feel clever and proud for putting it together and then being really excited at, oh my God, I now know what the setup is. I understand what the stakes of this scene is now. Here's how things have now evolved or changed or devolved. And then this movie constantly, as you said, just twists it like 15 degrees off of how you expect the scene to go. Somehow the worst thing is avoided narrowly, or a worse thing happens than what you expected was the worst possible outcome. And almost always it's because the person who is affecting that change is behaving like a real person and not a movie character. They are all better looking and more charming and shinier than the people we know. But everyone in this feels like some relatable type of person, you know?
Yeah. I mean, like even down to, you know, Argyle or like characters that like Thornburg, you know, that you could just lift out of the script with no trouble whatsoever.
Yeah.
You guys got your laptop open to information and stuff. Somebody told me this, and I don't know if it's true or not, but somebody said we were doing the Blues Brothers recently at Smodcastle Cinemas. We also did Die Hard recently, but interestingly enough, now that Disney owns Die Hard because they bought Fox, that's a movie that you can't.
It's harder to screen.
In
They make this much
it's
harder.
way harder to screen.
Yeah.
We did like a Smodcastle experience. That's where like people like buy out the movie theater and I host the screening for them. And they bring like 20 friends and stuff. And they chose to show Die Hard. So it wasn't a public sales exhibition. So we were able to get away with it and stuff. But while we were doing a screening of Blues Brothers recently, somebody in the audience was like, raised their hand during the Q&A. Because at Smodcastle, I get up and do Q&As for movies I had nothing to do with. And so in the Q&A section after Blues Brothers, somebody raised their hand and they're like, the kid who tries to steal the guitar from the wall in the Blues Brothers and Ray Charles shoots the wall. And he's like, go on, get out of here. they said that's our guy.
It sure is.
Yes,
it's his first
Is it?
screen role.
It is.
Young guitar thief.
That's wild.
Devereaux
That's
White, I think is the name of the actor. Yeah.
Yes.
He's still around.
I mean, that's like, think about it. Like Blues Brothers and Die Hard, two like very important movies in my life. That kid was in both of them. That's nuts.
It's pretty cool. And he's really funny. I mean, him laughing at
funny.
You just got buck fucked on national TV or whatever. That's a sort of big triumphant moment, I think. Him laughing in the limo.
Yeah.
Is he in 2?
He is not.
No, he's not.
And he never returns.
No, I mean, he did movies. It's just like,
but not in a Die Hard.
No,
because like 2 has, you know, Bonnie Bedelia, William Mather, and Reginald Vell Johnson, right? Like they bring some people back.
Yeah.
3 obviously kind of has this like Hans Gruber legacy is like their pitch for that movie, right?
But
like,
they're out in New York.
They're in New York.
On John's home turf.
It's an obvious pivot. Like that makes sense. And then after that, I just feel like they get bogged down for too long trying to figure out what another Die Hard movie will be.
Well, and 4
and
and 5
then it's like, well,
kids.
we just have to make one.
Right. But kids played by different actors.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Where you don't have the same sense of history. I mean, it is, to go back to this question, it's like, this synthesizes the Bruce Willis movie so perfectly, where it's like, great, audiences want to see this a billion times. I think part of like the struggle with Die Hard sequels for me is at a certain point you go, what's the difference between a Die Hard 3 and a Last Boy Scout?
Right.
You know, if the Bruce persona has these sort of earmarks that are the same, it's like the defining thing is the sort of the tapestry of characters. It makes sense. Die Hard 2 is like, well, fucking John McClane can't exist in a vacuum outside of Holly Gennaro and Powell. You know, he needs those two. That's the sort of like trifecta. And then from that point on, it just becomes like guy who doesn't do things exactly the way other cops would do them.
I tend to be like alone in a situation for some reason involving guns.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Die Hard in Airport, Die Hard in New York. Live for Your Die Hard is sort of just like Die Hard with cyberspace.
Yeah.
Good Day to Die Hard is Die Hard in Russia, right?
Yes.
Sort of.
Yeah.
At that point, like the FBI are kind of involved, or the CIA or whatever. I don't know. I've never seen that more than once.
That's the Jai Courtney one, right?
That's the Jai Courtney one. And then there was this like supposed Lego sequel they were going to do, and they were going to have flashbacks to like young McClane.
Day one. Right.
And like have a new actor play
I know about
him.
that one. I know about that one because when we were making A Couple of Dicks, aka Cop Out.
Yeah.
Yes.
He was talking about that. He was talking about next up he was going to do a Die Hard movie, which he was really looking forward to because he set it up. He's like, I'll work in the beginning and at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I spend the opening of the movie tied to a chair, setting up the story, and then the end of the movie getting out of the chair and kicking ass.
Yeah.
So he's like, the rest of it is going to be a flashback to a young John McClane adventure in New York.
But who the hell do you? You know, it's a cursed thing.
I mean, but
they didn't do that, right? Like the one with Jai Courtney is not that at all.
No, Jai
they
Courtney
were like
is not,
still
like
talking about it a couple years ago, up until like his diagnosis was made public. They were still sort of putting that out there, but they had that problem with Jai Courtney too, where it's just like. I remember when they announced what that one's Good Day to Die Hard.
The fifth one, yeah.
Right. And there was sort of the announced studio wish list of the 20 young actors they were looking at. And it was the most bizarre, like a list that included Shia LaBeouf and Paul Dano and Jai Courtney and Aaron Paul and just every possible direction of anyone who was between the ages of 25 and 37.
Right.
And it was so clear that they were like, we don't know how to replicate this. Do you cast a guy who seems like a movie star, or is the point that you cast a guy who doesn't feel like an action star? And is there anyone who had that sort of this current stage of their career has the Bruce charm that would be surprising applied to this type of movie? Or do you cast the guy who now resembles more what Bruce has become? And it's like, that's going to be twice as hard, 18 times as hard if you're trying to do it for McClane himself. But I'm also like, it is one of those characters where there is nothing, you cannot extricate this from him. You know, I agree.
I
think it's
I don't think they'll remake Die Hard.
You can't. I think you truly can't.
He's a key man clause when it comes to that movie.
Right. And it's why people try to make, you know, The Rock will make a movie like Skyscraper, where he'll be like, I'm going to try to make my Die Hard. But I think people know that there's something sacrosanct about Die Hard itself. And its building blocks are so basic that you can rip them off without feeling like you're just doing a carbon copy, because it's not. It's a very simple dish prepared with incredible ingredients.
You're right. It's spaghetti al limon or whatever. You're just like perfect. It's just like Parmesan cheese, lemon, like oil. Like that's all you have, whatever.
And it's telling that even at the point where they were like, Bruce is getting old, maybe the next Die Hard movie is wraparound of him going, I remember a younger adventure. They still know they can't make a movie that doesn't begin and end with him. And the moment it's now become public knowledge that he's not really in a condition to act, that movie is done. Even if it was only going to be 2 scenes at the beginning and the end, you cannot frame a Die Hard movie without him being the guy. And it is just part of that excitement of like, even when I'm watching this for the first time in the early 2000s, and I'm already a Bruce fan, and I've seen him in the Shyamalan movies, and I'm like, I like Bruce Willis a lot now. I want to go back and watch the movies that made him a star. You feel that excitement that's like listening to a band's breakthrough album, where even if you exist in the future where you know the outcome, you feel the energy of this is clicking into place in real time. You can feel.
Can we give some shout outs to other strong work by the leads that maybe people are unfamiliar with? For example, we all know Bruce Willis, of course, John McClane, many movies and stuff. Yeah. But have you ever fucked with Bruce Willis in the movie called Mortal Thoughts? With Demi Moore.
I've never seen Mortal Thoughts. Is that where he met Demi Moore?
That's Bruce. No, they were already a couple at this point.
Alan Rudolph movie.
But it's and who's the other actress?
Glenn Headley, who's a great actress who died very young, which was very sad.
What was it called? The Dirty Rotten Scoundrel.
Yeah, it was in Dick Tracy.
Give yourself some time to search out Mortal Thoughts, because you get to watch Bruce Willis act. First and foremost, Bruce Willis was an actor, and then he became a movie star. But in that movie, he gets to act. Another movie where you get to see him act, and you see the natural charm, no gun in his hand or anything like that. And in Mortal Thoughts, he's playing a scumbag. And also in this movie, he's somewhat playing a scumbag as well. But it's one of his best performances, and I think it's uncredited. The Paul Newman movie, Nobody's Fool.
He's so good.
Amazing. He is
Bruce
uncredited,
Willis
although
steals the movie.
It's a big role.
So,
I assume he was uncredited for some contractual, like, you can't put me on the poster, so just don't credit me reason or whatever. He's great in that movie.
Well,
he is fantastic in that movie. Say again?
No. There was this thing with Bruce Willis, I mean, would sometimes sort of slip out in interviews where I think he loved the vast majority of the elements of being a hugely successful, popular movie star, right? He loved the freedom, the ability to make whatever movie he want, to get movies greenlit, whatever. And then there were times it would sort of leak out in interviews, his frustration of the bigger I become as a movie star, the further I start to get away from like just being an actor.
Yeah.
And that there are certain roles the audience isn't going to accept me in. There's certain movies where if I sign on, the expectations are going to get out of whack. There's any movie I'm in stops being small, even if the budget is limited. And if I do something like I want to make Breakfast of Champions, right? And that movie doesn't work, it is mocked at a level that is different than someone else just trying to earnestly make a Vonnegut adaptation. You know, it's like, why did this action star do this?
Another Alan Rudolph movie.
Yeah.
Another movie that Bruce came in for like one scene, a cameo, and fucking destroys, absolutely slays, is Rick Linklater's Fast Food Nation.
Incredible in that.
That's
where he does the speech about like there's shit in the meat, you just cook it.
But that felt like he would understand sometimes, uncredit me. Don't sell this movie on my name. It's not even a contractual thing. It's not an ego thing. I want to just be able to show up and for a day or two, for one scene, just serve this as an actor. Just like dig in and do scene work and connect with my co-stars. And in certain cases with something like Nobody's Fool, it's like, well, I want to fucking work with Paul Newman.
Right.
You know,
and Robert Benton as well.
Yes.
For heaven's sakes.
He's an extra. You can see him clearly on screen, on screen.
The Verdict.
In The Verdict.
Yeah.
In Newman's final big monologue. And you can just imagine that guy who's like a couple years away from finally getting his big shot. He gets moonlighted like a year after that, maybe. Just being like, man, my dream is to hold my own with that guy someday.
Yeah.
I'll show up for a tiny part in Nobody's Fool. I want to fucking go toe-to-toe with Newman. And I think like Willis, we love Willis.
Yeah. I adore him. He's one of my favorite movie stars ever.
That's my thing. I'm like,
and like he has like half a dozen, like 12 Monkeys is my favorite Willis performance.
Yeah.
Because he's just so like raw and emotional and sad, but he's also kind of doing the action movie. You know, like he's tough and he's strong.
That's the thing he could do better than anyone else. Just like bringing that sort of level of weird, lonely sadness to genres that you do not expect that from. And you wouldn't expect it from this guy who seems like he could fucking make the whole world revolve around him.
What's the obviously like Moonrise Kingdom, like I mean there's so many great performances, the Shyamalan movies, like you said, but yeah, it's interesting, especially with Die Hard. It's like he follows it up with so many movies. Two of his most famous flops are right after Die Hard, right? Hudson Hawk and Bonfire of the Vanities.
Ford Fairlane. Oh, not Ford Fairlane. That was the other guy. Hudson
Ford
Hawk,
Fairlane is the Dice Man, of course.
Same director?
It is. They're both
yes.
Rennie Harlan, right? Yeah. Or no. Michael Lehman did Hudson Hawk.
Yeah, that's right.
Rennie
Michael
Harlan
Lehman who did Heathers did Hudson Hawk.
Yes.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. I mean, Hudson Hawk's pretty good. Like Hudson Hawk is like unfairly maligned.
It's also, I think it was viewed as this like vanity project of like someone stopped Bruce. He's gotten out of control. And you watch it now and you're like, this is the weirdest vanity project of all time. I wish our movie stars were making weird personal swings like this.
Bonfire of the Vanities, like. Everyone was like, he's miscasting this. I don't think he is. Yeah. I have always defended
the character in the book was British.
The character in the book is a totally different type, right? Yeah. And like he's not doing that, but I think he's fun. It's Hanks who's lost at sea. It's also that movie.
That's just like that's not a safe move.
No, not at all. I mean, that movie is fascinating.
He has this sort of like awkward stumbling period in the early 90s where some of them are hitting and his flops are really sticking to him. Yeah. But all of them, the flops in particular, are like interesting strategically. And they speak to a guy who's like, I've been waiting to have the opportunity to dig into stuff as an actor, and I want to try some shit, and I want to work with some interesting directors.
We got to start winding down, Griffin. Yeah. We do. Should we talk about the Christmas movie thing at all? Is it completely over-discussed at this point?
It's definitely a Christmas movie.
It's not
obviously Christmas because it came out in the summer, but it's set at Christmas time.
What's crucial actually in our research is that the studio liked the Christmas vibe. They were like, there's not a lot of Christmas in LA movies, and we like that. We like that this has the Christmas in LA thing going for it.
It was like a specific thing set up from the beginning.
Right.
Of like, this gives us
a look. It's not some observation that evil millennials came up with later. It was always there. Right. And Christmas movies, especially the Shane Black variety, which I know this is not technically a Shane Black movie, but it's sort of,
right.
In
people
his
retrofit it into being a Tony Scott Shane Black movie when it's neither.
But like is about like, you find your people. Yeah. Like in Christmas movies, right? And you're in dire circumstances and you find your people. Like,
I think the loneliness
that's what this is about.
Of that sort of it's very Christmas. You step back, you have the Scrooge-like moment of introspection. What are the relationships I fucked up? Who do I want to be with? Who do I want to spend this with? It just heightens the whole feeling of this guy going there to try to have a conversation to fix a relationship and fucking it up.
And then, obviously, Run DMC, right? At the end there.
Well, yes. I mean,
beautiful use of Christmas in Hollis.
Yeah.
Another shout out I want to give for Alan Rickman for a movie to watch if you haven't seen it. Have you ever seen a movie he did with Madeline Stowe called Closet Land?
No. Never heard of that movie.
Do yourself a favor and watch it. It's a two-hander, just the two of them in it. But it was a movie that was, it wasn't sponsored by Amnesty International, but they were involved somehow because it's a movie about torture. And it must have been a play. It's the two of them, and he plays multiple parts while being the same person. He's an interrogator who's trying to get her to confess to something or to break, a political prisoner. But it's shot very stylistically. It's not like a film that's kind of set almost in the real world. The audience is kept as off center as she is. The plot of the movie is she's dragged into this thing and she has no idea what's going on, and this dude's job is to break her. And so in the process of the flick, he gets to play a few different characters in his attempt to break her down and break not just her spirit but her mind psychologically. It's a fucking fascinating movie. You can probably find it on YouTube.
Wild.
I want to watch this movie. Rickman apparently thinks of it fondly. I mean, like
he was great in it.
When I think of Rickman earlier, I think of Truly Madly Deeply, which is like a huge movie in Britain, obviously.
Yes.
Beautiful
movie.
This movie he did with Stephen Polyakov, who's a great British director, called Close My Eyes, which he's amazing in. Like, he always, the best thing about Rickman is just that he always kept doing that stuff, even while he's like, also, he'll go to Hollywood, he'll do the big movies.
Even after Die Hard and after
Robin Hood.
It might have been before Robin Hood, but remember he does a bit part in The January Man.
Wow.
He is Kevin Kline's painter friend who's very eccentric. And it's a very non-showy part.
Yeah.
But he's in it, and he's absolutely memorable.
That feels like a Ben's choice.
I mean, absolutely. It's a big Connor Ratliff reference point as well. I mean, that's the thing with him. It's like Rickman never gave a bad performance. I think he is truly a guy. You will throw out that when's he bad sometimes.
I mean, he's a good example for it. I mean, he was in one of the most notorious stage productions of all time, which Antony and Cleopatra with Helen Mirren, which people were like the worst shit they've ever seen. But obviously,
really?
I didn't see that.
Yeah.
He was always good.
Yeah. I have not seen everything he's done, but I have never found him less than incredibly interesting to watch. And part of that is perhaps just the thing of like, that guy basically lived a full life before he became a movie star.
Yeah.
He was formed, and he was just like
had a life outside of movies. He wasn't somebody whose life outside
he's
of
not
film
some
was
like
defined
business
by his job
guy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Showbiz guy.
Yeah, and similarly, it happened for Bruce at a younger age, but they talk about like Glenn Gordon Caron, what moonlighting creator's name?
You got it. Glenn Caron.
Glenn Gordon Caron.
Yes.
Yeah.
He wanted Bruce so badly, and the network absolutely did not want him, and they just kept on testing more and more guys away from it. The moment when it happened for Bruce, quote unquote, like overnight, was a little bit late.
Yeah, no, he's a John Hamm type. He gets famous in his 30s, late 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. Or mid 30s. I don't know how old he is. Can we do the box office game, Griffin, or is there anything left on Die Hard?
I'm trying to think of
it's an impossible.
It's an impossible.
It's one reason it's great that Kevin's here, because it's like, what are we supposed to say? Die Hard's good? You fucking know that already. These like canonical films are tough to find new life in.
Right. I think sometimes people expect us to be like, oh, great, now finally the definitive Die Hard episode that Blank Check's getting to. And it's like, we're just gonna be two guys fucking talking about
Die
a movie
Hard's
that rules
good.
for
I've loved it since I was a child. Yeah, like it's fucking amazing.
Yes.
The thing about this box office game is Die Hard opens limited on 21 screens, expands the next week, but I don't want to do the next week because the next week Midnight Run comes out, and maybe we'll do Midnight Run someday.
Kevin, do you have Midnight Run thoughts?
I went to see that in a theater, brought my friends, and it wasn't an obvious choice for us. We were 18 years old, 19 years old or something, but I absolutely adored it. I was a massive Charles Grodin fan.
I mean,
it's the best.
And watching De Niro, like nowadays, thanks to the Fockers and shit and many other
funny.
things.
Like we know
we've seen De Niro be funny, but that was one of the first times where you're like, this guy's fucking funny, man. Like, why didn't anybody ever use him in his comedy?
He's very similar to McClane. This is kind of blowing my mind that those movies
I know they're like
came out a week apart.
To back.
And I'm like, they are both perfect textbook examples of the thing I think people get wrong so often in so many different areas. They're just two of the most perfect films, in my opinion.
Number one at the box office, however, on July 15th, 1988, Griffin, is a gigantic smash hit comedy with the biggest comedy star in the world.
So it's an Eddie
Murphy.
Is it? It's not a Beverly Hills Cop sequel?
No.
Is it Golden Child?
Not Golden Child.
88.
It's kind of his last...
Oh, it's Coming to America.
Right, it's Coming to America. Yeah.
Yeah.
The last really great movie in that run.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I really love that one.
Yeah, Coming to America is great, but I'm just saying, like, after that, right? You're getting into Golden Child, Beverly 3. You're getting into the
Isn't
rough...
Golden Child before?
Maybe it is.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, you're right. It is.
Yeah. No,
86.
I would say that's the end of the first Eddie movie star chapter.
I include Golden Child in my golden era.
Good era.
Yeah, I remember going to see that and being like, because they kept this part of it hidden in the marketing, but it's like Eddie Murphy fights Satan.
Right.
Like,
he sure does.
I honestly wish they had fucking like marketed the movie like that. But when I got into the theater, it was an Eddie Murphy's movie, so I was going anyway. But during the movie, I remember turning to Ernie and being like, he's fighting the fucking devil, man. This is amazing.
Because I guess it's right. A year after this is Harlem Nights.
Yes.
and then another 48 hours.
That's where he gets to direct. Eddie Murphy gets to direct.
He sure does. But like
Eddie directs and then is like, I hate directing. I'm going to go back and make sequels to all my previous movies.
Right. I'm going to do another 48 hours. I'm going to do Beverly 3.
Yeah.
It shows you how directing can affect you from time to time, where you're like, oh no, I'm not doing that again. And
there's such a funny quote he has about it where people were like, do you want to direct again? He was like, no, it's a fucking terrible job. I remember being on set and having like a art director come up to me and go, which pillows do you prefer? And I just went, I don't know, they're fucking pillows. I don't care.
It's a job of answering questions at the end of the day. I mean, look, a lot of things go into it, but you are the repository of every answer for every question anyone's going to have. They're trying to get the movie out of your head. So all day long, it's people going like fluffy pillow or stiff pillow. And
I think he liked the idea in theory of not having anyone who was boss over him. And then he was like, I actually hate answering these questions, and I don't really care to make the choices outside of my own part of the film.
Right.
Yeah.
Which you can do as a director.
Totally.
Like, I don't get into the weeds about pillows and shit like that. I always feel like, look, you got a department, it's yours. You get to make your movie. It's me making my movie. So have fun, go nuts. As long as it doesn't fuck with my plot, like express yourself.
Yeah.
Number 2 at the box office is new this week, Griffin. Maybe this is why Die Hard is limited.
Okay.
It is the final film in a franchise. Action thriller franchise.
Okay, so it's not Death Wish. It's not Dirty Harry.
It is Dirty Harry.
I always thought none of them are in the 90s.
None of them are in the 90s.
So it's the Deadpool. I always thought that was like 91 for
It's 88. I mean, he's pretty old at that point. It's the Deadpool. Buddy Van Horn film. Liam Neeson's in it.
Yeah.
Patty Clarkson is in it.
Yeah.
I've seen it. Jim Carrey is in it.
Jim Carrey's it. That's the thing. I feel like
Jim Carrey's in it as well.
It gets mostly remembered for its supporting cast.
Its most lasting legacy, though, is Deadpool.
Correct.
Yeah, very much.
Isn't it weird that movie has that title? But to think the final Dirty Harry movie coming out the same summer as the first Die Hard movie, when Clint was the first choice, and if Clint's in the movie, the legacy for this film is probably it begins and ends that thing's like pretty well directed.
Yeah.
But beyond the fact that Bruce transforms the movie, I think a lot of the discoveries don't happen if it's Clint and he's coming in going like, hey, this is who I am as a movie star. This is what happens in a Clint movie.
Yeah.
At this point, he basically only directs his own films or works with his 3 guys.
Yeah, with guys who are basically ghost directors for him, yeah. It's not the best Dirty Harry movie. Having watched them all. It's okay. Number 3 at the box office is a film we've covered on this podcast. It's a huge hit. Family film.
1988. Is it Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Been out for a month.
This is pretty good eating at the Cineplex. If you're within this month able to go see fucking Die Hard, Roger Rabbit, Midnight Run, Coming to America.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
I saw all 4 of those movies in a theater at the movie theater I now own.
Some other movies you could have seen that are not in the top 5 of Bull Durham.
Great fucking movie.
Love that movie.
Crocodile Dundee 2.
Bad movie. We've covered on the podcast. That film is insane.
Okay, so number 4. It's a Disney film, an old Disney film.
It's a re-release?
Re-released, yes. Old.
Is
upsetting.
it Snow White?
Slightly newer than
Song
Snow
of the
White.
South?
No, not that upsetting.
Less upsetting. Okay. Pinocchio?
No. I mean, this is just you naming.
Dumbo.
No. These are all great guesses.
Upsetting is the clue I'm trying to go off of.
This one always really gets me. This is my favorite Disney film of these.
Bambi?
Bambi.
Okay. Upsetting in that way.
Yeah, emotionally wrenching. Yes. And just beautiful. I'm a huge Bambi
it's a beautiful movie.
Afraid to show it to my kid. Number 5 is a comedy launch of a huge star. Well, he's already sort of famous, but this is his big moment.
Okay. It's not an SNL guy.
No.
It gets him an Oscar nom.
Yes. He's not known as a comedy star now.
Oh, it's Tom Hanks in Big?
There you go.
Man.
Another great movie you could have seen.
Yeah.
I assume you saw Big as well.
I saw that in the theater as well. I saw every movie you're mentioning. This is peak movie going for me. So I saw that as well.
You saw Short Circuit 2 in a theater? That's number 7.
I sure did.
That's a
saw
Ben
Arthur 2 on the Rocks?
Hey,
number
don't
5
say
is
that.
alive, but we
It's
lost
not a
some of
favorite.
Yes.
Number 5 is alive. You saw Arthur 2 on the Rocks? Did you see that? That's
I did. I was a massive, massive Arthur fan.
Hey, man.
So I couldn't
Ben.
wait for Arthur 2, and boy, I was disappointed.
Did you see the Corey Haim, Corey Feldman film License to Drive?
Not in theaters, but I did see it on video.
That is also in the top 10, along with Crocodile Dundee 2, previously mentioned, which is a film that starts out with him fishing with dynamite in the Hudson River. You think
it's got maybe the greatest opening scene in the history.
You think you are in for a great time, and then everything else in that movie is terrible.
We did Patreon episodes on them, Kevin, during deep pandemic lockdown, and we were like, you know what? They're all short. Let's knock them out. Let's in one sitting. Watch all fucking 3 in a row. And we watched one, and we were just sort of fascinated by how big these movies were, and we're a little too young, and we missed them. And we're like, let's watch them cold, all 3 in one sitting. First one, we're like, I get it. It's charming. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it fucking works. It's a crowd pleaser. Second movie starts with him fishing with dynamite in the Hudson River. We're like, okay. I think my man leveled up. Yeah. I think he knows he's playing with house money now. And then immediately turns into Bad Rambo.
Yeah. Have you seen
that has
Dundee
almost
2?
0 jokes in it. From that point on, it's just a bad revenge thriller.
Yeah.
That's it.
Wow.
Die Hard. Thank you, Kevin. I mean, like, we're gonna wrap up, I think.
Kids, thanks for having. Anytime. It's always a joy to sit around and movie geek out with both of you.
Oh,
you're the best.
Get out of here.
You guys know your shit, man. It's fun. You actually hear. This is the highest compliment I can make. I'm gonna watch Die Hard tonight.
Hey,
hell yeah.
My favorite thing, Kevin, is when you pull out I'm already forgetting the titles, but when you're like calling out the deep cut Rickman Willis things.
Closet Land, maybe. I'm gonna go watch that. This thing looks good.
I love how much of an omnivore you are as a movie fan, and I feel like
it's so weird. I feel
and you know
like
what? It is on YouTube.
But
it's just on YouTube.
You know the fucking landscape, my man.
I remember I was at we were doing screenings of Spaced. You know,
the Edgar Wright series.
Edgar Wright series.
Yeah.
So we did it out here. It was years ago. It was right before Quentin went off to make Inglourious Bastards.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's between Grindhouse and Inglourious Bastards. And Grindhouse, I guess, didn't make as much money as he hoped. So he was a little down in the dumps and stuff. So we're at the Spaced thing, and he's friends with Edgar. And so it's Edgar, Simon, and the actress whose name escapes me at the moment.
Jessica Hines. Jessica Stevenson.
Yes.
Jessica, that's right. It's Jessica, who also has that wonderful scene in Shaun of the Dead where her party meets their party and stuff.
It's so fun.
So we did that. We showed a few episodes, and I did Q&A'd with them and stuff, and then opened it up to the audience, and Quentin was there as well. So afterwards, there's like this was at the Cinerama Dome, part of the ArcLight at that point. ArcLight's gone. But the ArcLight had this deck that you can go out near the bar and have like private events and stuff. So afterwards, we're all out there on the deck, and we're sitting around talking. It's me and Simon and Edgar and Quentin. Quentin's getting ready to go over to Germany to make Inglourious Bastards. Like 2 days later, he's getting on a plane going to Germany. So as we're having this discussion, we're talking about movies, and Simon Pegg said something like similar to what you said, where he was like, man, Kevin, you know a lot of movies. And he wasn't part of the conversation. He was adjacent to the conversation. But it triggered Quentin in such a way where he turned to join the conversation.
I know movies.
Like it was a challenge
but
to a duel.
It wasn't like, hey, I know movies too. But it was him going, Kevin doesn't know movies. Kevin knows mainstream movies.
Right,
Kevin knows Star Wars and all the big movies. He's going, he doesn't know everything, and he really doesn't know obscure things. And I was like, well, he's right. I guess he's right.
No, but I think
so whenever somebody's like, you're an omnivore, I always go like, well, he's the omnivore. I just like what I like.
Well, I'll say this.
He's got this like it seems this repository of like video movies and like crazy like Italian B movies and like all this stuff.
Right. He's encyclopedic. And I've talked about this. Or he'll
be like, oh, that guy did 12 episodes of fucking Matlock, and you're like, how the hell do you know that? Like, you know, like that shit. Like,
But I've talked about this with you, Kevin, that like you talk about movies all the time in the public sphere. You know, you're doing events at your theater and your podcasts and interviews and all these sorts of things. But very often the things you get asked to talk about are your own films and sort of the big genres, the superheroes, the sci-fi, the things that people know, like Star Wars, that you grew up with idolizing. And the thing I love about having you on our show is that you start pulling out like forgotten 90s movie star dramas.
Right.
You know, which it's like, you know, you're you like every type of film.
I do. I'm a big fan. Have you guys ever done Michael Ritchie's career yet?
No.
We did a Fletch episode.
We did do a Fletch episode. Yep, that's right.
For the Bad News Bears, though.
Yeah.
Come on back.
One of the greatest American films ever made.
Smile?
Smile, another one. The Candidate,
yeah,
another
one. Really good.
Funny Farm,
really good.
Another one. Yeah, no, that wasn't Michael Ritchie. Funny Farm was George Roy Hill.
Oh, yes. Okay. Then I'll hold
Fletch,
on to that.
That was the movie.
Yes. No, Fletch is a big Ben Hosley movie.
Fletch Lives, not so much.
Yeah, that one's not.
But Fletch Lives has the one moment that still makes me laugh to this day, where their chant is as simple as "Scum, scum, scum, go back from where you come."
And just remember that, of course, you were trying to revive Fletch for like 10, 15 years.
Yeah. You were going to do it.
I was involved for a minute there.
We tried to buy the rights for Ben, but they outbid us.
Those fuckers.
And wound up in the hands of did you like the John Hamm?
I thought it was good. Yeah.
So did I.
I just want them to make more of them.
I was a fan of the books, the Gregory McDonald books, as well as the movie. So when they did that one, I was like, you know, that's exactly who Fletch was in the books. He was like, you'd want to fuck him. He was charming. And like every woman wanted him. And he was like, he had been in the military, so he's like strapping. So John Hamm like really felt like the incarnation of Fletch from the books.
Right. Our version, our take was gonna be more like he's a podcast producer.
All right.
And he is handsome, but like less of a John Hamm type.
All right, Griff. I gotta go home.
Funny, really funny. Kevin, thank you so much.
Such a pleasure, kids. Anytime you need me. And everyone else who's listening, you like movies, come down to Smart Castle Cinema, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey.
We are working to put together an event. We want to do a screening. Hosting there, hopefully this summer. Tried to do it last summer and things didn't line up, but hopefully we'll be able to announce something soon-ish. And at the time this episode comes out, Masters of the Universe Revolution will have been out for a week or so.
Sure.
Which I'm immensely
posting end of Feb.
I think it's a great season.
Griffin is absolutely fantastic.
He's the bomb.
As our Orko. As I talked about in the last episode when I was here, stands for our second season. He's to pun intended. He's an absolutely magical Orko.
Well, no. But I think the whole season is so great, and I think the now 15 episodes that will sit together on Netflix are a really satisfying watch in totality, and hopefully
fingers crossed we get to add 5 more.
I know. Teddy told me the sort of season 3 arc as it's mapped out, and it's so good.
It is really, really cool.
It's really
hopefully
good.
We get to do it.
Yeah. But if nothing else, I got 2 action figures out of it. So thank you for that.
You did, man. And I thank you because you gave him such heart and such soul that when we were I said it before on the other episode, when we were in the writer's room, we were like, let's just make Orko so cool that people want to get tattoos of them.
And we've seen it.
And I have seen many, our Orko, not
I'll
Orko
send you pictures when I see them out in the wild.
Your Orko,
Yeah.
So you did it. You did it. You connected.
Well, that was
in spite of the fact that I didn't necessarily. Your Orko definitely did.
That was my goal, but I was fighting very hard to try to get this role before I had access to see any scripts. And I didn't know if I was going to be trying to force a lot of emotion into a guy who still mostly just made magic tricks go wrong. And my job was made very easy by the way the character was written, the material you gave. I kind of just had to say the words, and it worked.
You're fantastic. I don't want to say you're magical again, but I will. You're magical.
Well, you're magical.
We all agree Griffin is magical.
David, you're magical.
Thank you.
And Ben, you're magical.
Hell yeah.
Hey, Jersey's on. Thank you all for listening. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you to Marie Barty, associate producer on the show, AJ McKeon, production coordinator and editor, along with Alex Barron, JJ Birch for our research, Pat Reynolds, and Joe Bowen for our artwork, Lane Montgomery, The Great American Novel, for our theme song. You can go to blankcheckpod.com for links to some real nerdy shit, including our Patreon. Blank Check special features, where we'll be doing a Die Hard 2 episode, a one-off to fill in the gap between the McTiernan entries, and also are doing our Terminator franchise commentaries right now.
Yes, that's true.
That is good.
Mm-hmm.
That is good.
Yes.
I think it's good. And as always,
yep,
it's a fucking Christmas movie. This is not worth debating. It just is.